Okay, I will call to order the March 15th meeting of the Sierra Madre Planning Commission. Can we have roll call?
Chair Spears, Vice Chair Hutt,
Here.
Commissioners Catalano,
Here.
Dennison,
Here.
Desai,
Here.
Friarman Hunt,
Here.
and Pevsner.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
I'd move to approve the agenda
Second?
as it is.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries unanimously. Approval of the minutes of the March 1st meeting. Anybody have any comments or corrections?
Looked fine to me.
I was not here, so
No exception.
Okay,
abstained.
motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we have one abstention. Okay, next we will move on to audience comments on items that are not on the agenda tonight. Please come forward and state your name, as much as your address as you desire, and limit your comments to 4 minutes.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Barry Gold, 441 Ramona Avenue. For the past several years, I've been active in the Preserve Sierra Madre group, whose goal is to support responsible development here in Sierra Madre while maintaining the unique character of this very special community. Our Planning Commission plays a vital role in this effort with its specific responsibility for the stewardship and maintenance of Sierra Madre's general plan. Since the general plan update was approved, I have watched with much pride as this commission has diligently and methodically reviewed our municipal codes, just as you are doing tonight, and recommended to the City Council the necessary changes to bring these codes into compliance with the goals of the general plan. The value of your work on behalf of the residents of Sierra Madre cannot be overstated. When it comes to preserving and protecting the cherished uniqueness of Sierra Madre, I believe that aided by your work, our current City Council is the best and most effective that we have ever had, and that we need to make sure that our current council members are kept intact so that this cohesive team can continue the valuable work that they have been doing for us. To do this, I urge everyone to vote in our next election on April 10th to re-elect the 3 incumbent candidates, Rochelle Arizmendi, Denise Delmar, and Jean Goss. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then let's move on to the one thing that we have on our agenda. It's a discussion item. And I talked to Vincent before about how we're going to do this, and because it's a discussion item, I think we're going to have sort of less structure instead of the formal question and answer and audience participation. So what I thought we might do is, I think we've talked about a lot of the policy stuff in prior meetings, but I think it would be a good idea if the subcommittee just went over the main policy goals and what changes we did sort of on a global scale without getting into the individual items, and then make sure we're all on the same page, and also that'll be helpful for the big audience that we have. And then we might take some audience comments, and then we'll start going line by line, and at that point, if any audience members remain and there's any issue that comes up, just pop up right when we're talking about that item. I also think when we go through the code, probably the best way to do it is to skip the uses section, because that's sort of one of the biggest and naughtiest issues, and try to go through the rest of it, and then we'll double back to the uses, and we can sort of pound through those. Okay? So, as we've discussed in other meetings, we're looking at the commercial code. We got here from the non-conforming code, which the City Council approved at their Tuesday meeting, so that's good news. And basically, as with other codes, we've separated the regulation of new construction and the design of that construction from the uses that go into them, especially either in new buildings or in existing buildings. And so that allows us to number one, take the use, or the design findings that we've built on in other codes and apply them here. It also allows us to take some of the design and development standards language that we had and make it more of a design guideline type thing instead of, regulating the size of block in the walls, which I think we did it on one ridiculous provision. And then also we incorporate the standards from Measure V, 13 units to the acre, to stories high, and we bring in the FAR stuff from the general plan. And just like it in R3, we have a sliding scale of small things that you can do of right, medium-sized things you can do with the administrative design review permit, and then larger things would require full design review permit before the commission. And then turning to the uses side, because we're just really looking at uses as opposed to new construction, it allows us to actually be a lot more lenient, especially uses that are going into existing buildings. And hopefully that leniency will allow some empty storefronts to fill up and to us to be seen as a little bit more business friendly. Also, instead of the laundry list of uses, we went to a category model, and then we keep a separate the director will keep a separate detailed list of those things. And then finally, we separate the uses out by size, so small, a lot of times smaller ones can go in of right or with less review, and bigger ones would require more fulsome review. And then finally, with regard to parking, which we had a large discussion of at a prior meeting, we tailored, or we brought in some parking concepts that were similar to the ones we did in the non-conforming, where you can have some review on on a discretionary basis, but we didn't attack head-on the concept of what the parking numbers are, and I don't know if we want to go there with this review. I mean, you can only bite off so much at once. So, but if it's the opinion of the full commission that that's really something we should look at now, maybe we could. And then finally, because these revisions touch on some other codes, we had some minor revisions to the manufacturing code, which allows all commercial uses. So we wanted to make sure that cross-referencing works. And then on the discretionary review section, because in some places we're using a minor conditional use permit, and as it's currently written, it only applies to residential projects. So we had to clean that up a little bit. So that's really sort of the conceptual stuff. Are there any conceptual concepts or questions people want to talk about before we open it up for the public?
Yeah, I have one, John. You mentioned the parking a minute ago. I'm really not clear on exactly how all the parsing all the parking issues are going to be parsed out here. The parsing issues, but I think that we had some very meaningful discussion last time about how we were, we had some very unnecessarily restrictive, not restrictive requirements, but ones that simply could not be met with what we have, and then how the fungible general parking had to figure into it. So, are we going to? How is any revision in the parking that we might really develop that's radically, or I should say incisively different, a big improvement? How's it going to figure into what we're doing here?
Well, I think maybe that's a discussion that's best when we actually get to that section and look at what the proposed code does. But it's not, I don't think, a radical revision, at least at this point. And if you think we need to go further, maybe we could talk about that there, because basically there's a provision in the current parking code that allows for some shared parking concepts, and we've taken that and sort of broadened it. Just as with the non-conforming ordinance, we had a situation where we allowed some leniency through discretionary review, and so we sort of merged those concepts and broadened them. But we didn't say things like, instead of 3.3 per thousand, it should be 2 per thousand, or we're not gonna do Pilates studios differently from nail salons or anything like that.
I think that those are pretty, just getting off of the whole bean counting thing to begin with is a good incisive step.
Right. Well, I think the question really, I think there's two questions. One is, what's the right answer for parking? And then the other is, how much of that answer do you want to try to attack now, and how much do you want to save for later? Because
There's a separate parking,
right.
there's separate parking ordinance in the code. So that's a whole different issue than what we tried to attack in this. When we get to it, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, you all have a clear vision about how they're going to mesh eventually.
I don't know about a clear vision of how they're all going to work, but I think
Well, we had a vision of how this was going to work in terms of parking.
I think we've taken a step
good
forward. I don't think it fixes the issue, but
So is it a good assumption that we'll tackle maybe even next after this, the entire parking section and
Well-
update where needed
At
the
some point,
previous
yes.
sections
Yeah,
that
I think
to do it
no
at
longer
some point.
we
conform?
have a to-do list, I think, and I don't know where the parking falls on that, but I think we also have some flexibility on our to-do list on moving things up and down. And so, that's an issue we can decide if we want to go there or we want to look at some other codes first.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say a couple words, because I was one of the other people on the committee, that I think sort of conceptually what we were trying to do, as John has mentioned, is work on maintaining the character of the commercial zone, but also try to do something to make it easier for businesses who want to start here, who are completely appropriate to our community, to get started, without having to go all the way to a conditional use permit for something which no one would think was inappropriate. And that's what's been happening.
Right.
I mean, we can look at, specific things like the scooter shop and a variety of different things have tried to come and get turned away because of how our current code is. And so we really thought a lot about how to make it, friendly to the residents of Sierra Madre, but also to be friendly to the kinds of businesses we'd like to encourage to be here.
Sure. We had good example of that a couple of meetings ago with the woman who had difficulty starting the dance studio,
Right.
and had a question why a karate studio was as of right, but she wasn't.
Right, and we've had, to the full commission, we've had a few people come on similar kind of concepts, but as a subcommittee, we also did outreach to other businesses and realtors, and we heard many, many more stories of that.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's a pervasive issue, and if you look at the general plan about the downtown and then also about economic development, there's all sorts of discussion about encouraging certain kinds of uses and incentivizing, and although we don't deal with the budget at this level, we pretty much know the budget doesn't have a lot of fat in it that we can start throwing out to subsidize businesses. So the one thing we can do is sort of reduce artificial barriers that aren't really providing any protection. They're just keeping businesses out and having businesses go to Arcadia or Pasadena.
Yeah, a lot of that, I imagine, just comes from a very, very old practice of trying to imagine lists and long lists of different kinds of businesses we'd like to see here, and that's just like
Right, and it also comes from the issue of
don't
conflating
say anything you don't have to.
new construction and use, and really our only tool was a CUP, so we threw a CUP at everything, and that helped to make sure we didn't get big, giant, ugly buildings, but it also prevents the little mom and pop shops from starting up.
Mhm.
So hopefully we've got a system that goes towards allowing the smaller ones to fill in without losing our ability to regulate design of new construction.
One thing we talked about last time, and I don't know if it's baked into the commercial code already, was this idea of not the laundry list of business types, but the proximity of like businesses or that sort of thing. Is that in here, or is that?
No, we don't, on this turn, we didn't do any sort of regulation by proximity. And one of the, I think the issues that came up is, sort of sadly true joke that we're really good at nail salons,
Yeah.
right? And we get lots of those, but we don't get as many stores and restaurants as we'd like. And so what do we do to, sort of, do we want to limit the number of nail salons or how close they are? And one of the thoughts is, well, maybe what we should do is make it easier for the stores that we do want and the restaurants to come in, and then the market can try to work that out, and see how that works. And if that's still not doing it, then maybe we do need to have a little bit more regulation over the number of uses that are right near each other. But the flip side is maybe we could just bake that in now, but it's not in yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I also think the proximity is a little twitchy to me, because a lot of the uses that there are several of just happen to be near each other, and I don't think it's as much proximity as total number in a way, and I think that to kind of say, no, you can't be in that particular spot. We could talk about this later.
Yeah, we
when
can
get
talk
to
about
our
Yeah, and I
specifics.
think part of it too gets into the type of use. And when you see there's certain types of use that have certain negative externalities, those typically are going to get a discretionary review even if they're small. And so under the CUP findings, there is the concept of location and need for the use. And that's something that can get factored in if you're putting your, third liquor store in a row or something like that.
But does that have any teeth in terms of, I mean, we ran into that when the tea shop, right? I mean, one could argue there's one right across the street, but that didn't, I mean, if they met everything else, it seemed like we didn't really, and maybe that's the type of business we were okay with, but point being, I don't know, does that have any teeth as far as saying, well, that's too close? Like, I mean, does it literally have to be next door for us to say, well, you've got...
Well, that's the nature of discretionary review, right? I mean, at what point do you say we have too many? I mean, if we had 4 tea shops next to each other, maybe we would have been saying, I don't think this is a good idea. But maybe if we think there's 2, and I mean, in that particular case, I was sort of interested in making sure that the restaurant equipment was fulsome, so that if maybe the tea shop concept didn't work, the cafe concept would, without undue renovation costs. So
It seems to me that the way those applicants described their new tea shop, that it was very, very different than the Anglophiles across the street. And so they may both be called tea shops, but they may be very, very noticeably different. Well, we could really get into trying to pass a lot of judgment. I mean, restaurants would be very different from each other. Architects' offices, who cares? We could be in the same building, and.
Well, but I mean, what I don't want to belabor the point, but to me, I think your point's well taken globally, that the idea is to have less hurdles in the way to attract, to be more pro-business, and not just like business, but even small business, to be intentional about that. But I think what goes hand in hand with that too is we also want a diversity of businesses.
Right.
So, I don't want to single out like day spas or nail salons, but the point being is, I think it would be a shame if we made it lenient for businesses to come here, but then we ended up with, 50% of 2 types of businesses.
Right.
So we're kind of failing on the second point, you know, and so it's, I think it's important that the 2 are hand in hand.
Yeah.
So.
And I think when we get to the uses section, we can chew on that in a lot more detail.
When the subcommittee reached out to the community, was there any discussion of this particular issue?
I think there was discussion sort of generally, but not particularly to a certain use or certain locations or anything like that. So. Okay, well, before we start digging into the code, let's see if there's anybody from the audience that would like to address us on any items.
Good evening. My name is Ramon Navarro, and I'm the founder of Java Madre Roasting Company here in town. I'm here this evening to introduce myself and share my vision for my small business that I started back in 2014 in my kitchen. I'm a coffee roaster. Until recently, I'd been operating in a workshop at my residence in the Upper Canyon. I've since moved, and I'm no longer able to roast at my current residence because of logistical reasons. But rest assured, I'm still a resident here in Sierra Madre. Currently, I'm roasting outside of the city and exploring channels, the channels required to come back to Sierra Madre and roast coffee here in town and sell my coffee here in town. I've always been interested and intrigued by East Montecito. Although I was permitted to roast at my residence up in the canyon, I wasn't able to do so because of local the permitted uses. Wasn't able to do so on Montecito. In the future, I would love to be part of the community, of the economy, and the fiber of Sierra Madre, not only as a resident but as a small business owner. I see a lot of potential with that section of East Montecito that can draw some foot traffic without turning it into a zoo at the same time. We have the brewery that went in there. We have a hair studio that teaches drum lessons and music. It's a very eclectic place, and I think Java Madre would be great in there. And initially, I would like to just start roasting there, and I have several accounts that I supply for, and grow into a storefront where you can actually come up and order a cup of coffee or a specialized coffee drink, buy a pound of coffee, and then also get a sandwich or a baked good from hopefully someone locally sourced. But I just want to introduce myself and say that I am looking to reestablish back here in town, and I hope to do so. Thank you.
Can you clarify though, real quick? You weren't able to occupy a business or a storefront on East Montecito because of the use was not allowed?
The use was not allowed, and I was told it had to specifically be roasting. Had specifically stated that it was coffee roasting. I believe there was seed roasting that was allowed. Nut roasting was also allowed, but coffee roasting wasn't allowed.
Well, we allow to brew beer, but we can't roast coffee.
I'm gonna have to double check.
Yeah, I wanna
see what the situation is here.
That's interesting. Okay.
That's exactly the kind of thing I think we're talking about getting rid of.
Yes, and I feel kind of fortunate to be here and to piggyback on that point. I understand why there are conditional uses and there's permitted uses here, but it kind of needs to be a little broader, but stay within what we were talking about earlier with maintaining the city's stature and charm, and preserving it. But coffee roasting, like nut roasting, like it just the coffee beans are seeds technically, and but I was I knew that I had to go through a conditional use hearing to get it, knowing that it could possibly get tossed out. So economically, I am a very small business, and that wouldn't be the best thing for me to.
So where do you roast now?
I'm just going to say outside of the city.
Okay.
In an effort not to burn any bridges or hurt my future. So,
I'm glad you.
But you're still up and running.
yes.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to his point, as I said, we did propose some revisions to the manufacturing code because it's cross-referenced with the commercial code. And we did a tiny bit of tinkering with the uses just because there's
Yeah.
some
We
people.
had heard your story
Because we had a couple of feedback from people who were running up, and also because there was a couple of uses that just were ghastly, like rabbit slaughtering.
Just
But we'll get to that.
clarify for me, or synopsize, like, in this case, is it because it's in the manufacturing zone that, it sounds like a case of too much specificity.
Right,
That's
it
exactly
isn't
it, yeah.
exactly the right thing.
Okay.
It is too much specificity.
It's the same thing we have in the commercial zone, which is this specific list that you have to fit into rather than more general categories. which is what
And
we're
as
referencing.
uses change over time, you know, Pilates is not listed, right? So can't do it.
Okay,
So,
all right, well, we're working on that, so.
okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's go to it then. So, we'll start on the commercial code, section 1736.010. In this section, we just did general cleanup and making things consistent. Also removed a reference in F to redevelopment agency, which is.
You're looking at the red line, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the red line, but I'm also gonna look at the clean, because some places it gets
Crazy.
sort of hairy. So does anyone have any unction or questions on 3610?
No, I didn't.
That looks good.
Yeah, it just looks like straightening the language out.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really going on here.
Yeah, looks like a lawyer just came in and cleaned it up.
So it is. We added a new definition section, and there's two major things here. One is SROs. Our housing element, which was approved by the state, requires us to allow SROs in the commercial zone. These still would be subject to the density limits of Measure B, so it would be 13 units to the acre. But effectively, they're very much like just small studio apartments.
Right.
So we put them in. And this language I cribbed right from the housing element.
Did you add the language about the prime storefront area?
Yes, that's the other issue. The other thing is, we've talked about how we want to preserve the prime storefront area for retail.
Yeah.
And so by defining, and also, so there's a question when we get to the uses section over, you know, we want to be able to treat that area differently than the other part, right?
The back of house?
The back. And so for residential, you're prohibited in the prime storefront area,
Okay.
and you're allowed in the back. For office, we made a discretionary review for prime storefront, but retail could come in.
Okay.
So that's trying to balance the incentives there.
So, okay, and I may be going somewhere else with this, but I really like this idea. And I'm wondering if this also allows us a mechanism to, because what this is exactly what we need in terms of the storefronts that you have. The problem is they're prime real estate, and they're also they're the visual language or the connection between the street and the
Right.
building, the commercial enterprise. So when businesses go in and then they shutter those and close it off, like as if there's nothing there, to me that's a problem.
Right.
You know? And I don't know if this is something that can be utilized for certain uses where they do that, and it basically closes that prime storefront off from the street. You know, whether they completely black it out or build something in front of it or whatever. So this concept, I think, has some potential to help us, you know, in that where that needs to be how it's used, and then also how it's presented. Like that needs to be you know.
Right, and the point of this definition is to give us the ability to regulate separately that storefront area from the rest of the building.
Okay.
And so as we go through, you know, we can see how that does and whether we tweak it or not. The other thing is it only applies on the main commercial streets, and that's because you'll remember at prior ones we talked about how there's some little houses like on Lima, and there's also residential right at the street front on Montecito, and you'll remember these uses carry over to Montecito. And so what we said is the prime storefront area only is on Sierra Madre Boulevard and Baldwin and the westerly 2/3 of East Montecito. So Lima you know, you can, the little bit of Lima that's in Windsor, those aren't gonna have the same sort of, rules.
Even if they have a storefront, it's not considered.
Right, well, you can have a storefront, you're just not gonna be required to.
Does that delineation happen somewhere, or it's?
It happens right here,
So it's
in the definition of
facing-
main commercial street.
Oh,
back,
okay.
yeah.
See, because the prime
Oh,
storefront is
okay.
on the main commercial
Got
street.
it, got it, got it.
I'd say-
Should the main commercial street actually end at Lima?
No,
Well, it only applies in the commercial zone,
well,
so it goes,
because
it
the-
goes,
Yeah, yeah.
it
Goes
goes
past it,
beyond
yeah.
Lima a couple,
Yeah.
Yeah,
units.
Yeah.
let's look at that.
But-
It shifts to an
Like the Bank
RP
of
at a
America.
Right, but
Okay.
after that, so
Drop a
it,
load.
it's, right.
yeah, a little farther. I was thinking about this, and I was, the prime storefront, and it reads, from the property line back to a depth of 50 feet. So I was just thinking about the couple of places that are set pretty far back.
Mm-hmm.
And do we care that 50 feet wouldn't be as much on those, like where lunch is, the hair salon?
Right,
And, well, like the one that came to us before, what's gonna be the tea shop is kind of set farther back.
Right,
don't
and I
know if
think
we wanna,
there's an issue with that little bit of North Baldwin where a number of the buildings are set back.
yeah,
And whether we want to encourage those to sort of get back to the store,
Mhm.
you know, repair the
Come
street
back to
front,
Yeah.
or if we want to sort of say, well, that's what you do, and so that's an issue. I think the concern is if you say from where you start the building and there's 50 feet, that maybe you could sort of game something. I don't know.
yeah, I don't
So-
know, but I was just thinking
Right.
about that issue.
Well, I think what's gonna come up is in that case, if there's a discretionary review of any sort, like, this would not be as applicable, cause I think you would take that into consideration, like, the building doesn't start
Right.
till 60 feet,
Mhm.
and you're saying 50
Right.
feet, like, it's.
And lunch is historic, right? I think that building's on the list, isn't it?
I don't know.
It
Um,
is.
Yeah.
I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
you know, it's gonna have its own
Yeah.
ball of wax.
But
Yeah.
it was just it's just the one thing that I was thinking about in relation to that.
But this is really an important point, because, you know, there are enough examples around, unfortunately, in other cities, where the commercial edge tends to ruin the residential just beyond. And, you know, there's some places where we do it better than others here, but that kind of transition is always important. And when you were talking about like South Lima a minute ago, you know, you could picture a lot of like artisan shops that would or seamstress or lots of things like that would fit into essentially what a little old residential building would be, but it would help make for a very, very soft edge. And you know, North Baldwin's a little more problematic, but you know, we should think about
Yeah, I
how
think-
to do this.
I think it's important to think about this and also the boundaries of the zone, because you know, Lima's only got 2 properties deep in the zone, so it's not like you're gonna
The
do
whole block.
Yeah, you don't even have the whole block down, so you're not gonna do much there.
It's
Rea-
just those first 2 houses.
Right. It's really that this comes into play a lot on North Baldwin, because you've got a series of those that are set back, and some of them are historic. Then, you know, the other question is the Verizon building ever gonna, you know, I mean, if the Verizon building goes, would you want that one to stick back out after you've had that
Yeah.
run of ones? I don't know. And the other thing is, it's on a street corner, so it's not like it's butted up against a house. So,
No, and they'll cite the Bethany Tilt-Up building anyway, you know.
Right.
But I would just like to interject that you say, well, there's only 2 houses deep on Lima. Let those go. Let that be ruined, and then the next couple of houses down are much more at risk, and that's why
Well, but they're in a different, I mean, they're not in the same zone, the next house is down.
Well, you know, it really, yeah, there are plenty of places around where there's a hard line between zones, and everything just changes abruptly, and it's always or often the residential property, the ones that are immediately adjacent to the commercial zone, for instance, that suffer. And I think that what we're looking at here is actually kind of nice in terms of being a very soft transition that doesn't hurt
In
hurt
those
that
cases,
edge.
though, they're commercial zones, right? Those two lots.
They're residential uses.
Tiny.
Yeah, residential uses.
I guess
yeah,
you could
tiny.
put a commercial building on there, but I don't know.
But the
It
other
wouldn't
thing
be
is,
much closer to the street than the house is, really.
well, I guess
It's like a
what-
postage stamp.
What I'm
Well,
understanding
yeah,
your concern is
Let a weaver be in there.
if you
Yeah, no,
demo
that's
that
perfect.
building and you'd be concerned that someone would bring a storefront up and then next to a house? Is that the concern?
I'm just speaking very favorably, very positively that if there were some certain types of, say, artisan uses in those little buildings, those little houses, that would also be maintaining the soft transition.
I think that's what would more likely happen.
Right, and that's-
like an office,
that-
law office, or it's
Well, I'm speaking in support instead
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
cranking for a change.
Well, and the other part of it is that's one of the reasons why those like Auburn, Lima, Windsor, those aren't considered main commercial streets. Hermosa, although Hermosa's different because it's got mostly institutional, because the zone, the setbacks are going to be a little different there, and we're going to have a little bit of use differentiation, and that allows us to do that.
So I guess the question right at the moment is whether the 50 feet generally, as it's stated here,
I think,
is
I mean, I brought
really
it up.
workable.
I think it's fine, but I just thought
Right.
it bored a little discussion.
Yeah, and I also looked on the Google map and measured depth, and most of the inline storefronts are 50 or more, but typically not much more. The realtor's office on the corner of Auburn isn't, because it's sort of twisted the other way, right? But most of just the regular inline stores, that sort of matches that type of
Yeah,
building.
so if it happens to be 70 feet, so who's going to bother changing just for the last 20?
But does this
Anyway.
by any means, just without knowing building sizes and depths of those commercial lots, because this becomes an important differentiator for where you can locate like an SRO or something in a commercial
Right.
building, right? It would have to be beyond the 50 feet.
Right.
But if the building, let's say, or upstairs, but if, say, the building's only 60 feet deep or something,
Then you really can't have
you
res.
can't do it.
Right.
Okay, so in effect, we're saying the building would have to be
Or it'd have to
some
two-
number larger than 50 feet.
Right.
Or it'd have to be upstairs.
Or it'd have to be upstairs.
Have to be upstairs.
Or it'd have to be off the main commercial street. So you could have those little houses on Lima, even though they're within 50 feet, they can be res.
But does this in any way preclude a business from, let's say, having a prime storefront space that's open, to the public, and then like subdividing everything beyond that into offices or something?
No.
Or even in the 50 feet?
In the
thinking of-
50
I'm
feet.
thinking of like the optometrist that went in, right?
Right.
I mean, they've got the front area and then it's offices
But
in the
that's
back.
part of their business.
Okay,
It's
but
not-
that has no
you know,
bearing on
and
it.
because the business is a medical business.
Okay.
And what's specifically used, what part of that business is used for different uses of that building.
Is not regulated.
No. No,
Okay.
It's just the general category of what the
So
business is.
there we've got sort of the setting. Let's skip.
Before we do,
Oh, yeah.
there's a definition in parking of front yard, and front yard is used for 20 pages before then.
Yeah.
Should we maybe put the definition of front yard up into the definition section? So you have, in the parking section.
No, I think front yard is sort of standard English.
Okay. So then, should we remove it as a definition in C, in this section?
Is it in here?
Yeah, in the parking section, The very end of the parking section.
What's the number of the section?
I'm scrolling up to it. 1736-100.
I think we don't need a definition. I think if you find the language confusing, you can fix it there.
No, that's fine. There is a definition included in there. So that's what I was saying is that should we?
No, that's not a definition. That's a parenthetical. There's a difference.
Is there anything, does it say, does it tell you something special that you have to do with the front yard?
No, it describes what the front yard is.
Oh, well.
It's a parenthetical, but if
Yeah,
it's
okay.
important enough for a parenthetical, is it warranting a definition? I guess would be my.
It doesn't. I don't think it warrants definition. The rule of thumb on the definitions is if you only use it once, you just talk about it there. You don't define it somewhere else and then use it. It's only if you're going to use it a lot that it saves sort of space. So like I said, I think if that's causing you anxiety, and just so you know, we revised that twice. So I think maybe we haven't got it yet, but let's look at it there because
Okay.
that's the best way.
It sounds to me like that may have just been the victim of somebody making long lists just to make long lists in the past, right? We could clean that up.
Okay, so then let's skip the list table
Okay.
and the adult business section, which really is a tag on to the use thing, and go to section 1736.030, which is on the red line, is on page 10.
030. All right.
So this section is where we get into requiring a design review permit. And we've taken the same criteria as we used in R3. So it's minor facial facade alterations and less than 500 feet is upright. So if you're building a storage building in the back, we don't need any kind of review. 500 500 to 1,000 feet requires minor or facade, as long as it's on the first floor. If you go to the second floor, or you do more than 1,000, it requires a full design review permit. And then A2 is in the strange instance that someone wants to build a McMansion. Then we have the additional findings on D8. Y'all remember that? That's the sort of turbo finding. Yeah. That's the technical term.
So, okay, fine.
So the only thing that we monkeyed with in taking this from R3 to commercial is that on B1 we said 20 feet when one story or 20 feet, because a lot of times your first story on commercial is higher, and I don't remember in R3 if we said 15 or 18 feet or something like that. So we bumped that up a little bit.
But okay, so 20 feet becomes the de facto height limit for a single story? In commercial?
Without higher design review, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could.
The height limit is 30 feet.
The height limit is so if you wanted to build a 30 feet tall, one-story building, you'd need to do a full design review permit. But you can do it, it's just. So I guess the question here is, do we feel like just bringing the criteria from R3 over to commercial makes sense?
For new construction?
For new construction. And it seems sort of like similar levels of intensity, that's why.
And additions.
Right.
And alterations.
My only thing, you're talking about some of the guidelines too that we had in there?
No, this is just the triggers,
Thresholds?
the thresholds.
Okay.
So it's 1,000, basically it goes, 0 to 500 is of right, 500 to 1,000 is administrative, and 1,000 or more is full design review with the planning commission.
But you're saying tying into R3 stuff?
No, I'm saying is those are the same thresholds in R3.
Oh, yeah.
That's where we got those. So the question is, do you think, we should make them a little bigger because this is sort of more, or I don't know.
Well, if you think about that in terms of the ideas of form-based planning, then You know, doesn't that become a question of whether you want to just see more consistency throughout, based on, without too much regard for whether it's an R3 use or commercial use, or do you want to go from R3 to see something else just because it's commercial?
Right.
You know, we still are. I think we're shaking off the tail end of some very, very old zoning concepts, in terms of how somebody's imagination, like from the 50s, about how a city is supposed to grow, and we're not there anymore. Okay, we're not talking about that. So it's really a question of do you want to see the general massing and texture stay pretty consistent, you know, at a maximum, you know, throughout the commercial, and if you do, then I think it helps make the case for using some of the R3 information.
Right. Let's see, Barbara has something to say.
Barbara Lee Klein, only because I'm not sure where to jump in, so I'm jumping in here. And I say no to form-based, but, and I apologize, I arrived late. I'm going to kind of throw a chink into the fence that you have here, and I'm going to mention the ballasts. Over the years, I've mentioned ballasts, which might cut into the 500 feet or 1,000 feet that you're talking about, especially on the south side of the street and the west side of the street, or the downward slant. I'd like to hear a discussion of how to safeguard residents that are having lunch out on the sidewalk on tables. We don't have any of those, you know, the ballasts or the cement barriers that will stop a car if someone accidentally accelerates and goes up over into the sidewalk. And since I mentioned that, I know that that's putting the city on notice for liability, but I really do feel it's important. Back about 1.5 years ago, I witnessed a car that went up over the curb when they were going to Subway. Fortunately, they stopped. And when I saw that area boarded up, I asked, and they said, no, it's for a, you know, some type of a banking service. But that's what reminded me, this is probably a good time to discuss that. And although it might cut into what Sierra Madre has, I think it's important to make sure that we're remaining safe.
Thank you. Okay.
I mean, I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking a little bit out loud, but, you know, 500 square feet of changing something, you know, it all really how you look at it, but in a commercial district or whatever, is not a lot. Like,
Right.
to me, that it's all how you view it. Like, if we want to, any little thing that changes, and it could become an issue, and we want to have our pulse on it and know what's happening, and give our thumbs up or down, then you want to keep that square footage really tight, because then you can basically see everything. Granted, we don't have a large commercial district, so that is totally feasible, but, you know, at first blush, looking at that, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of, like, you can have a business that comes in and needs to renovate or whatever, or expand, and 1,000 or 1,500 square feet. I mean, that's still a small business. It's not like, you know, we're talking, you know, major box coming in or something. I mean, that's small square footages. So,
Right, but it's, just to clarify, it's interior renovations don't add square footage, wouldn't count.
No,
It's
I get
only-
that.
but
You
so-
add on, and maybe there's not the potential to really add on a ton of square footage.
Right.
I mean, most of these sites are built out like they're,
Yeah, I mean,
so.
basically the thing here is you know, you build a little storage on the back, or maybe an office, you know, for your, but you're not gonna, the basic concept is, if you're gonna build anything that we're gonna see, you know, we're gonna review it. I mean, and I think that that's sort of in keeping with the prior concept that we had a CUP for everything, because it was really the changes the structural changes that are the things we want to take a look at.
And so it makes it sound like here, if we're at, like, you're at 499, it's basically not, I mean, it's just a building review, right?
Mhm.
You're not,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
not, I mean, it's kind of by right. and-
Right, it is by right.
Okay, which is fine. So really, you're talking about once you pass the 500 threshold, you're gonna see the director or staff and kind of work it out, and then once it gets over 1,000, then it becomes a full blown.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And do you think
that's
those numbers are reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable for the size of our commercial sort of.
Yeah, these
district
numbers
and the
are
buildings.
a lot lower than most other cities.
Yeah, I bet they are. 'cause-
But-
Well, most of the buildings are pretty small. so-
But we're a lot smaller than a lot of other cities, so.
Yeah, look at the width of most of our commercial lots. They're, you know, what are they? And besides, a lot of what this does is it saves Vincent from having to tell applicants, well, I'm sorry, I know it's only 200 feet, but you gotta go see the planning commission
That
anyway.
was
you know.
exactly our intention, that, in order to permit small businesses to make small changes to a building
Mhm.
that aren't gonna have a major impact on the city, they shouldn't have to go through that time expenditure and money expenditure to come to us for something like that. It's a waste of everybody's time and money.
And I think that maybe over time, we might wanna move these thresholds up a bit. But I guess my thought is, right now, you need a CUP for everything.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm sort of more
A little.
incrementally minded to keep these numbers sort of low, so we don't inadvertently get some project that people go, oh my God, why did you let that happen?
Yeah,
So-
and that will invariably happen.
Does anybody remember what downtown was like during the 1990s?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to say something in favor of, like developing a robust downtown and your design guidelines and so forth. In the 1990s, I think that generally we had an economically weaker, not as robust, not as high end kind of commercial base here. There was also something that had been promoted by the Chamber of Commerce under a Main Street USA program, as I recall, which was a civilian design review committee that was outside of City Hall. It was made up of a number of different appointees. I was put on it and got off because it just was ridiculous. But they were with an economically weak downtown. These people were like doing a lot of imposing of design guidelines and opinions, and it was really terrible. And the program was finally gotten rid of. But I see without that now, fast forward, we have considerable improvement. Nobody's nitpicking about signage and colors and all that kind of stuff that they would just keep people coming back month after month after month while they nitpick them, and we're doing better than that right now simply because we're attracting a better class of business here, that we are more robust in that way, and much better design is coming along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we should keep that in mind, that everything that we do to help make our businesses more robust and facilitate things the way you're all talking about, the better our downtown is going to look.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very difficult to do good design on the cheap. I mean, it's sometimes possible, but it becomes very, very difficult.
And also with just a lot of regulation trying to, as opposed to a good economic base, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
on C?
Yes.
Does that read like, if you do a minor exterior facade alteration and interior alteration to an existing building involving some expansion, but as long as it's less than 500 square feet, you don't need anything.
Yep.
Okay. So nowhere in there would I read explicitly saying if you do any sort of, if you do anything on the interior, we don't care, and that's excluded from any review.
It's a little unclear.
That's meant to be captured in C.
That
If you think it's not clear enough,
We
it's not
need an
clear
or
because
rather
it's
than an and
because
there.
the ands make it sound like these are all conditions of exclusion.
Minor exterior
maybe the thing to
or
do
interior alterations.
is in C sort of list them out, like the way we've done in A and B.
Yeah.
Like C1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and we can, we can specifically say interior remodels
Yeah.
of any square footage or
Yeah,
something.
TIs, basically.
yeah.
not,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that
we're
would,
not asking for a review for that.
right,
Yeah.
that would clarify.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not exactly clear. It sounds like if you're doing both, maybe, or.
Yeah, it sounds like if you have to be doing both.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
it
and
has
that's
to be
not
less
the,
than
that's not the
500
intent.
in
Right.
order
Yeah.
to be excluded.
So
Right.
I think it just needs.
Okay,
a
we'll
rewording.
list those out just like in A and B, and then also, just to clarify, add an interior.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that sounds good.
Okay. Moving on to 35, this provision is,
No one's gonna argue.
no one wants drive-through, so there you go, we didn't change that. 1736040 is the design criteria. Generally here, what we did is we tried to take things that said you have to do this or you can't do that and make them more guideline-y, encouraged or discouraged. And then also, we took some language from the general plan with regard to pedestrian friendliness and whatnot, and incorporated that.
I think this one, C1, a little addresses your question about.
OC.
Right,
yeah.
yeah, the C
About-
is the pedestrian
About closing
friendliness.
up the front of buildings so they're not.
The sidewalk should be visibly and physically penetrable. Doorways at the street.
So you wanna go, I'm really interested to
that
get,
Because I-
addresses that question.
Well, okay, so I'm glad you brought that up. So do you feel like that? And this is, it may be dicey, whatever, but I just, to me, it's a real problem when businesses go in and block that.
Mhm.
You know, I don't care what business it is, even if it's a law office and they just put a bunch of those faux books, right in the front window. Like, to me, that, I get it, all right? It's just it's a closure of that street front. So,
Well, let's-
would this cover that? Like,
well, that's
like,
certainly the
you
intent.
gotta leave
but-
that, you can't do anything to permanently or even temporarily block.
Like if you just have blinds in front
Yeah,
of
like
the
you have,
windows.
felt
Curtains or
curtains
blinds.
and basically, and then outside it, you have a neon sign that says, we're open, but, like, that's not what we want on the ground level. I
Right.
mean, if you wanna do that, that's fine on the upper levels, but, this definitely is exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. What, are you okay with, before we get to C, are you okay with B? Because I know that this was a provision before that said you had to use these materials, which I thought, and I know that you've mentioned before, was problematic.
Well, I think what was problematic, and we had a case of this, which was right next to Valero, the dry cleaner building, and then now subsequently the storefront next to it, which is like an insurance sales or something,
Mhm.
was some other, I think they're selling like old toys, or I don't know what it was,
right,
but
yeah.
it turned they went in there and painted that building yellow,
Mhm.
like a submarine, and it wasn't up long. I think it was yellow for like a week,
Uh-huh.
and then they got a call or something saying, hey, I mean, it was bad. It was bad. Like I don't know. It was really bad. So like it got changed to an earth tone or whatever it is now. But point being, like, I think it's important we do stipulate there's some compatibility. If we just kind of go in and
There
say
is.
you
There-
can paint it whatever you want, like for the sake of diversity, like that, to me, that's there's got to be a consistency, like
Well, even the jeweler on Kirsten Court with the blue paint and the blue marble is kind of,
yeah.
right.
Well,
But
if you
look
look
at-
at G,
yeah.
look at G.
Gee. Only applies
G2.
Okay. The design of proposed project shall be related to the surrounding existing environment with greater emphasis on compatibility with adjacent colors. Okay, yeah, so,
So it does,
Yeah.
that's there.
But keep in mind, these things are only gonna fall in something that you need a building permit for.
Yeah.
And you can paint without a building permit.
exterior, but if there's an exterior alteration, like,
That
Is-
doesn't require a building permit. I don't think we can regulate that.
no, but isn't here, we're gonna, if you need an administrative design review or a full design, like minor exterior facade to me, you paint something totally incompatible, like that's altering the facade, right?
I know this says,
Changing
it says that following design criteria shall be applied to all development within the C zone. So what does that mean?
Well,
development?
I think there's a general concept of zoning that you get to touch stuff that you need a building permit for, and it's pretty hard. Even if it's not, even legally, just code compliance, if people go out and plant a bush in front of their thing, it's,
Well, but
or if they paint it
no, like, I mean, in
neon
certain
purple.
jurisdictions, like, maybe they're striving for homogeny in their storefronts, but like there are jurisdictions where, like, your awnings can only be so big, and
Right.
you have to get a facade or a storefront permit, because we want to see what you're gonna do. Like, are you gonna paint it pink and then put, neon awning? Like, you don't necessarily need a building permit, but someone's got to have oversight to see, like,
Well, the way
I'm not saying we regulate it like it's either black or brown, but what I'm saying is, like, something like that goes up.
No,
A bunch of people were saying, but
Yeah.
what happened to that?
No, the way I would
regulate that.
read this is that, if someone came through with a proposal as part of a construction project, and they proposed to have it neon purple or something, that we could tell them that's not such a good idea. But to me, the way this is written wouldn't capture the thing if somebody just went out there and slapped paint on it.
I thought there was a provision that we could regulate paint color, or in terms of, it can't be, garish, bright colors. It had to be, or pastel colors. It had to be more earth tones. And I think that was in the, could even be part of the Measure V.
Really?
hmm I just looked at that maybe a few months back.
Generally speaking, Manish, I think that what you're talking about is controlled if the jurisdiction has a design review process, a formal design review process like Pasadena does, and we're not there.
But I know,
that's
like,
the
even in
issue.
Arcadia, for small storefronts, like, this was a personal experience. We had to show them what the awning color was, the size of it, and then if we were gonna do any sort of paint treatment, what that involved. And that was an over-the-counter, it was an administrative thing. It wasn't like, we didn't go in front of any board, but, and you paid for it, whatever that cost, but it was basically like a one sheet, and they looked at it and made sure, like, the compatibility was there, like you weren't doing anything crazy. So
How exactly was that regulated there?
by the zoning plan.
It was in the zoning?
Yeah, it was, yeah. When you applied for a business license as well, like, and you're moving into this storefront, any alteration that street front,
Yeah.
they want to see.
Yeah.
So
I just,
all I'm saying is, like, if I come in, and it's more, maybe we need to talk about it in terms of an experience. If I come in, I move into a business on the boulevard, and I paint the front of it, whatever, lime green.
But even if it's not a new business, right?
Or an existing business.
right.
I don't need, you're right, I don't need a permit for that, I don't need a permit to plant trees in the little planters or whatever, but, so I do it. And then there's an issue, and they get a call, here, like, what the heck happened, and then, do they have anything that allows them to modify it? Sounds like there is something.
It's 1736-040, the downtown design criteria.
Oh, it's in there?
Well, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's what we're looking at now. I mean,
That's the current thing.
Currently, it says in there? So that must be the oh, colors. See, this.
yeah, but again, that goes to the issue of, is applied to all development. And to me, and maybe, you know,
Oh.
council can, it is, to me, I always read that to mean something you need a building permit for, which wouldn't,
Not for this, we don't require a building permit for it to change color of the facade of the building. It just needed to comply with the earth tone colors.
But do you apply this standard to whether it's a development, like a new construction thing, or an existing business?
Existing-
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, even existing.
You know, we're still like so much better than during the 90s. So that'll design review a committee was fighting against tenants who wanted to install. You know, remember what can signs were? You know, the
Yeah, yeah.
metal box frame with plexiglass and the fluorescent behind it. You know, and the lettering painted on. And we had so many of those cheap things back then. We're really not doing badly with less regulation about.
So I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want
Oh,
what
to.
we did
just
here was,
keep in mind that we do have a separate sign ordinance,
yeah.
so.
But I mean, what we did was, in C, we did change it to mean less of a shall and more of a should. And maybe people want to
did.
keep that shall.
Sure,
Earth
sure,
tone
sure.
or natural colors shall be utilized throughout with the use of bright non-pastel colors. It seems, we thought that was unnecessarily restrictive
Okay.
in our discussion. That mean you have to use only earth tones, and the trim has to be bright non-pastel colors. I mean,
Well, to me, okay, I agree with you, but that
So
last
much.
part, to such a degree as to become dominant
yeah.
to any structure, to me, that's the key part.
Yeah, I mean,
because-
I wouldn't mind keeping that, but taking out
Yeah,
the exact
I
specific
don't-
colors.
I don't
because
really
if
wanna
someone
regulate the
put a-
colors.
You know, some kind of pale color.
Yeah, it might look
A
fine.
very pale blue, I don't know, I wouldn't mind it.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
it's
you're
like,
right.
Who cares if it was a very light
But
color
you-
of some pastel, I
You
think
know,
it's a
you
problem.
know when, it's one of those cases where you don't necessarily know if it's right till you do it, but
Yeah.
you definitely know when it's not right.
Yeah.
Right.
You see it and you go,
But
whoa.
keep in mind the, you know, the architect's office down on Lima, it's muter now than it used to be.
Well,
Uh,
inside it's still whatever, but.
But,
yeah.
I mean, it was
There's
pretty
also
bright for a
pale
while.
green building, the one that was that lab, isn't it light green, sort of?
On Sierra Madre
On the
Boulevard?
boulevard, yeah, you know the one I'm
That's sort
talking
of
There-
just
I mean,
a
there are-
olive drab.
Look,
Yeah.
even Lucky Balmas, I mean, they got the red and black. It looks fine, you know. Like there's non-earth tone colored
Right.
buildings. I get that. So
So
I
There was debate whether or not that met the,
the red and the black.
yes, whether or not red is really a pastel color.
about.
So there was a lot of
Debate on that.
discussion about that.
Yeah,
change.
Okay, well, I'm with you on that. I don't think we should get into like you can't have pastels. You
yeah,
can't have
but I
this.
think
mean,
that
that's
you're right, the second part of that, so color should not be used to such a degree.
Yeah.
Color should not be chosen at such a degree as to become whatever,
Yeah, 'cause
something
if
that
it's an
kind of.
accent, it could totally work, you know. I don't know. But
know,
like,
just
I think you know when it becomes dominant, and you're like, wow, that's.
Yeah, well, look, you know where that works? Where that works is, you know, go to the indigenous part of Santa Fe, for instance, right around downtown,
all looks
where
the
there's
same.
so much consistency of, you know what I'm going to say, okay? So much consistency of an indigenous building type, or you go to Santa Barbara, where everything is so tightly
Right.
controlled that there the uniformity of color really starts to work, but it's a very, very different kind of overall
Aesthetic, yeah.
aesthetic and composition than we have in our town.
And it's one that's been there for so long that
Yeah.
they don't have any non-conforming buildings by now.
Yeah, all right, it's all made out of mud. Mud's all the same color, you know. That's not.
Even though none
It's
of them
not
are
us.
actual Adobe anymore, but, yeah, and I don't think we wanna go there, right?
I don't
Well,
think
we
wanna-
can't.
I don't think we want to
We're-
go. there.
we're never-
I think
we're never
the
going to.
Diversity's cool, and I think it works.
And I've also been to places with a lot of color, which I totally love, you know?
So, but
But I
what
think
I'm
there needs
hearing
to be
is we
something
wanna
in there.
incorporate some of this the language from C that we took out, that
Just the- I think
concept,
just the back half.
back into B, where we talk about materials and colors.
So that color shall not be.
Become
Maybe
the dominant.
this color shall not be so dominant as to, so, I don't know, something, but to dominate the
Right,
neighborhood is what we're talking about.
right,
so.
right, right.
And,
There are
and
things that
I
just
only
don't-
bring that up because it is possible. I've seen it. So, and I mean, it was remedied really quickly. It wasn't a big deal. But the point being, like, it went up, and then you're like,
Well, the other
Whoa.
question is, do we want to be, going back to the thresholds issue, more clear about what a significant exterior facade means?
well, to me, if,
That was
if
one
you're
of my
gonna splash color on there, like, it may be a small storefront, but it could be like the whole building, and it could be a 2-story thing. Like, to me, that's
Well, what we,
What
me,
if we
that's
just
altering
change
the-
this one word? B, materials. Materials, colors, and textures shall be compatible with those of adjacent. Rather than should.
See, it's a very, yeah, I agree, that would be a step up, okay, but that is still like subject to a lot of artistic debate.
yeah, I don't know if you get anything going should to shall, because what you're doing is compatibility, which is
No.
inherently
subjective.
discretionary.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I
but,
mean, we could do that, but also under C, retain some of this stuff.
well, I think we
about-
take some of this language we took out from C and reincorporate it into B. I guess the thing is, getting back to the triggers, we have significant exterior facade alterations,
Yes.
which, as determined by the director, have potential alter materially the character of the existing main building. So,
Here's the rub on that.
basically what we've done is we punt to the director to figure that out.
Okay, but that's in an instance where something's coming here. If I just by right go out and paint my thing, I'm not really bringing that before the director. So he would have nothing to kind of.
But at that point, then
How
he
does
would
that
say,
work? How
you
does
should have
work
done
in
that.
now?
Someone wants to paint their.
Yeah, if they, sometimes, they do come in and ask.
Okay.
Other times, they just go ahead and do it, and then we get complaints, or we'll notice that we send out code enforcement, have them come in and talk to us and
Mhm.
try to
So,
reason our way through.
how often do you really get, and I'm not challenging, I'm really interested in getting kind of a rough statistical picture of like, how often does somebody complain about something like this in town here?
Since I've been here only once.
Okay, okay. And what was the nature of that?
The use of color, overly bright.
Eh.
It's specific to Lucky Baldwin.
It was
Lucky Baldwin.
just about Lucky Baldwin's red?
Well, and I know of the case prior to
The yellow submarine?
Yeah, the yellow submarine.
Yeah.
And do you know, was the yellow submarine,
And then the business went out of business.
did they change the color because the business went out of business, or did they
No, I
change the
think
color?
they changed it in a complaint. Exactly.
But I guess one of the issues is, was it sort of just cajoling them, or did we actually feel like as a city we had the power to say, you've got to change that?
But see, to me, that's a
Where-
little
that is
fast, you know.
That can't be. How do we, as the city, have the
Because
power
it said
to?
right here. Earth tones or natural colors shall be utilized
Well, then we
throughout
should
the
strike
use.
that.
Throughout.
Yeah.
I understand your
I
It says it
like
right
concerns.
there.
on
It says it
overly-
right there.
I understand, and I understand the concerns.
Yeah.
But I have a fundamental, visceral challenge to the idea that we should be controlling the colors that people want on their buildings.
Yeah, well, I agree and disagree because, you know, as an architect too, I mean, I see people want to do all kinds of things, trust me, and half the time I'm spending convincing them like that's a bad idea, like, and I get the idea. We don't want to tell them like you've got 3 shades of brown and 3 shades of off-white and that's what you get. I'm open to a range of stuff, but when I see something like that, which is so off-putting and in that case, it actually ran around the side, I think, and because that building sits higher than the Valero, so like suddenly that whole corner when you come up is like a school bus right there. And to me, like, we're giving you plenty of there's plenty of colors other than school bus yellow that you can do. We're not saying it has to be off-white and brown. Like, you can go a light blue if you want it, or something that would, like, I mean, literally the sun was bouncing off that thing, and you're like, what is this? And then the building went under, I mean, not the building, the business like 6 months or a year later, and
After the color changed. If they still had that yellow, they still had it in there.
That's
You
right.
put them
We'll
out of
never know, I
business.
guess.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the issue is, if we have downtown and it's, earth tones, pale pastel colors, whatever.
I think that
I
part
think
should be
that's-
gone. Like,
that-
I don't
that's-
want that
No.
But what if we have orange, purple, aqua, cerise, cerulean, all these different bright colors right next to each other? Is there a
We have-
point to which we would care? I personally wouldn't care. Personally.
I would rather take my chances with that than to hammer on people about it gets, to me, it's like a guy who can only like buy a brown suit with a tan shirt and a brown and tan tie, and or somebody who does the same thing in all blues, and it's the only thing they know. If we started enforced, because most people don't understand really earth tones. Okay, it's because they haven't been to the New Mexico desert at sunrise, and so they only see all of these really dull tans and beiges and browns and
Not the Grand Canyon?
and well, or there. Or there. It's like, no, our downtown is going to be just like it's going to be like. It's going to look like communist Poland if we enforce too much of that.
I think
It's
we're
going
gonna
to be
fine.
deadening.
I don't think there's gonna be an issue. It's not a huge downtown. Like,
I mean,
I
I
think
didn't really care about the yellow
the
color
color
of that
story
building,
going
so-
on is fine, now, but I do feel like there needs to be some mechanism for, like, albeit one case a year or whenever, that when it's bad, it's bad. Like, you just know. And so, I think there is that can be, it's a non-subjective thing. Like, it can be jarring, it can be glare emitting. I mean, like, there's, trust me, you get a color up there and it doesn't happen often, I get that. But I think there's gotta be something in here that says,
It has to be somehow compatible.
yeah, like, and
More than what
and
we
you
have.
know what? The beauty of it, our compatibility is the eclectic nature. Like, it's not like, if it was like, we're Santa Barbara and you're saying you're compatible, well, then you're basically saying make it white, right? And have tile. But here, like, we've got colors up and down the street. I mean, the Hotel Shirley, like, there's like, it's a green, and there's other, Lucky Bombs doesn't bother me. I mean, but like, I can see how that would become an issue. But so I think it's fine. I just want something in there, like, if
So
it
do you
seems
think-
backwards to me that the way we handle it is, once there's a complaint, then we go after them for code enforcement.
Well,
Like,
but the alternative to that is
why not
is
just
to
why can't we
say,
just look at it and then, not us, but
because the alternative to say is every time you paint your building, you got to come in and ask.
yeah, but you're
and
not
that-
painting. It's not like they're going out and the building's being painted every 6 months. Like, commercial buildings are painted on a usually. I mean, having done tons of shopping centers where all we're doing is painting, those are 5 and 10 year cycles.
Oh, yeah.
For paint.
That's
so
true.
like minimum 5-year cycles. So it's not like, I mean, it's an expense. It's not like cheap to just paint a commercial building. So it's not done like.
And that's the problem with having absolutely nothing, but then going and person is just they like their color, right? They've spent the money already and had the inconvenience of and then the city comes along and tells them, it tells them, you know, no dice. It's, you know, it doesn't. We don't think it fits our guidelines.
Well, why not have them
It's
run it by beforehand?
Y-
Saves a
yeah,
lot of
can't we?
people heartache.
Yeah, can't we either have some education here, or some express approval, or something like that, or somebody at the counter that can make faces, or something.
I'm not trying to solve for the actual design process. What I'm worried about is that somebody comes in afterwards and it's the next person who's in that space and says, I want to paint the building because I'm trying to attract kids and I've got a submarine theme and I want yellow. And it bothered you? She said it didn't bother her. Incredibly subjective, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if it came before us, that'd be one yay and one nay, right? So why is it that we're going to try to regulate from here what we don't even agree on and what is subjective to the public?
It's a good question.
Barbara, you want to?
I'm sorry, but I've been coming so long that all these conversations remind me of 20 years ago. The public will tell you if they don't like it, they just won't go shop. They won't spend their money, they'll just, But I'm not sure where neon lights come in, if it's in this section. I will ask to make sure just the playhouse only. I'm gonna be like a conversationalist. I was walking through town the other night and I saw this big
Well, that's
massage.
Yeah, the neon is regulated in the sign code, which is separate from this. So
Okay,
that's,
good, yeah.
we're not
'cause
getting into
As long
that.
as it's on the inside, but on the outside, as
Yeah.
long as you're not going that way, because same thing with colors. The city council will have to deal with that like they have in the past. People will come about leaf blowers and the colors of the buildings and I think smoking. Those are the three big things that people show up for city council meetings. Thanks.
Can I ask council, if we have this language in here about, where did that go? G, the following apply to all development in the C zone. And it says compatibility. Could that be the new G, can that be applicable to someone painting a building a color that was offensive to the populace?
That provision really is going to apply mostly to a new development. What you're concerned about is someone changing the color on a building. It's not new, and I wouldn't recommend at all that you require somebody to come in and get an over-the-counter permit just to change the color of a building. But however, I will also say it is not at all uncommon for cities to have some level of design review or color range and some ability to control color in various parts of the city, even residential. It's not uncommon and it is enforceable. So the language that you used to have here, it does it for you. And so if you have someone, it's not a new development, someone just wants to change the color on the building, we don't have a set of guidelines. We could have, but we don't, for saying, well, it needs to be in these color ranges. So they pick a color they like, and if people don't like it and they think it's incompatible, this is the provision that's applied. And it is subjective, but design review and design elements are inherently subjective, and they're also enforceable under case law and code. So yes, you can regulate somebody just changing the color of the exterior of their building if that's the only thing they're doing and it's not an historic structure or anything. Yeah, you can regulate it, but you're probably not going to unless someone complains about it, because it's a small town, and that's the way we do code enforcement. It's on a complaints-made basis.
Okay, but so in that scenario, if C is struck, and it makes no mention of the previous section about color,
Right, if you take that out.
If you had a complaint, you'd have nothing to.
Well,
That's right. If you take that out, you have less.
we'd have less. We
yeah,
have
less
just
teeth.
compatible.
Right.
We have materials, colors, and textures generally should be compatible with the adjacent and other nearby buildings and the overall character of the downtown
and
area.
I just take the
Talking
earth
about the-
tone out.
Yeah, but my understanding is you're gonna at least take the second sentence and massage that and put that back into section B, and your section C will continue to be the pedestrian-friendly section. and then you've preserved it. And you may only use it once in a blue moon, but it's nice to have it if you think you need it.
So is the new language in B strong enough? Or do you think it should be? Materials, colors, and general should generally.
I think that it is. The saved language would say something like exterior colors shall not be used to such a degree as to become the dominant, color of any structure. Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Well, I
You
guess
need something.
I don't like Valero's teal. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do about Valero?
Nothing.
Yeah, teal's not an earth tone.
No, I wasn't suggesting you throw earth tones in there, but I think
it
you
sounds
do
like
need
we've got
something.
sort of mixed feelings on this.
Mm-hmm.
Let us try to tweak the language a little bit, and we'll look at it next time.
I mean, is should strong enough?
That's fair.
Or should it be a shall? Or does it
I think should is fine.
Because I think I'm more on the side of you. I really, I don't think it's as big of an issue that, and I really don't want to get to the point where people come in with their paint chips before they paint. That seems crazy to me.
Yeah, that's like those old days that were
I don't think
a
B is a
bust
tone,
anyway.
right?
Look,
No,
if we look at
I
the
think
new
only thing
G,
in B that you would look to
Well,
add
let's get to C first.
would be that little section of like
Yeah.
whatever color you pick.
John, the only reason
Just if it becomes super
Okay.
dominant.
I only wanted to point out that down the way it says the planning commission may promulgate and maintain blah 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 design guidelines. Maybe we can find a more if we scratch the stuff up above, and then maybe we could find a more gentle and proactive way to encourage good paint selections, utilizing this other section down here.
Yeah, I mean, the power of suggestion is a big one rather than the requirement. I mean, here's some good ideas.
I'd like to see us go that way. Would you agree with that?
No,
The challenge with suggestion is the same thing we're cleaning up on the lists, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not one of the colors that's in the suggested list, then are you not going to do it because it doesn't seem to be approved? So if it's well balanced, yes, I can be on board with that.
Maybe I was imagining more like good examples of stuff is not a suggested list.
I think to answer your question, yes. Like, when you face an approved list, it's easier to swim downstream than
Yeah,
find
yeah.
it, like you go, okay, well, give me that page. Like, it's just
Right.
and I don't
Let's-
think we
let's
want to
see.
go there. I
Yeah.
think we want to
Yeah,
give
that's
people the
what comes down to.
opportunity to pick any color.
Let's see what comes back.
Okay, let's move on to C. This pedestrian-friendly language was mostly cribbed from the general plan update. So this gets in a lot of ways to the concepts that you were talking about before about the storefront, and this is trying to make it so that you can see in and activate the street, so to speak.
But again, is this C is for its new development, right?
Mm.
Or does it apply to anything?
Well, I mean, it only applies to the extent somebody's changing something, so it's new or changed, right? I mean, if
If another business comes in and occupies the exact same space and doesn't do anything,
they wouldn't change.
It would be a
Then-
pre-existing, non-conforming.
But if they do,
they could
if they alter the
line their
We've just been
front
there.
and-
right, but
Well,
if they
I'm saying,
alter the
like, if I come
facade,
in, and I'm a whatever.
You paint the
salon or
windows
something.
black.
Yeah, I
on the
could do
inside.
that and then close up the whole front if I want.
but if you paint the windows black and close up the whole front, there's a good argument to be made that that's a significant
Yeah.
facade, which the director could say you need design review for.
But doesn't that facade thing only says exterior, right?
Hmm.
Right. Well, if you paint windows black, that's can be seen from the exterior.
Well, if I board up the front and close it, that's on the inside, right? I'm not touching the outside.
I think
I'm just
I
saying
think
there's-
painting the back of the windows, although technically
could.
inside, is pretty an
Yeah, I
exterior
could.
concept.
If you were applying to us,
Hey, look.
trying to make that argument, I think we'd vote you down.
Yeah, I don't.
You would never hear from me because I would be at the counter you're not requiring me to come before you.
I think we fall into the same code enforcement issues there that we do with
It's
the
part
yellow
of my
submarine.
job to find every possible way to.
And that's
I mean,
good.
that's
Yeah,
that's why you get paid.
that's why we
Yeah,
have you
so-
sitting next to me.
Instead of physically penetrable, wouldn't you just want to say should be
If it's visible.
visibly transparent?
Ah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Vincent, where are you looking?
It's number 1.
Oh,
C
right there.
one.
yeah.
Visibly and physically penetrable.
Well,
Yeah,
what's the
penetrable.
difference between that and transparent?
Transparent.
Is
It's
there-
clearer. It's more. I
Yeah.
think it's
But the idea of being physically penetrable means it has
Through.
it's doorways too.
doorways, yeah.
So
Well,
Well, you want to maintain the transparency. That's,
yeah,
So you're suggesting should be visibly transparent and physically penetrable?
yeah, we could do that.
yeah. Which means you can see inside.
Right.
And there will be a door.
Right. Yeah. These are wild concepts.
Yeah, right? But I think that, yeah. I think that's better.
I think these are great concepts. I just would like to see them to make sure that they apply kind of in basically any instance their business goes in. Like, I mean, to me,
Well, I guess the issue is,
that's possible.
you know, I mean, if somebody's just going to occupy an existing space and you don't like the way the space looks now, I think the answer to that is too bad. But if they alter it, then, you know, then we can review it.
Or if they need a conditional use permit. for
Yeah,
some reason,
right.
because it's a use that requires a permit. Or,
Maybe that's the way to do it then.
And one of the things when we get to uses is that we do require discretionary use for any, even office going in a prime storefront. And that's one of the reasons why, so. Any other changes on C?
Number 3,
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if we should really include cornices and columns.
what exactly is a cornice?
It's like
Cornice is the thing on the top.
The top, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but,
embellishment.
Instead of being so specific,
mm-hmm.
Well, it says such
maybe it could
as.
be some other architectural embellishments.
Or, yeah, detail, treatment.
Mhm.
We had language like that in our enhanced findings where we said if you did detail specific, to the style. I mean, it was talking about the style, but, architectural features or
Architectural details and features.
Because on one hand, cornices and combs are specific to, it's a stylized
Mhm.
treatment of, a facade. It's a detail,
Mhm.
So if you kept it more generic, then it's,
So it already says, the use of architectural design elements.
Such as storefront windows and other architectural treatments, something
Mhm.
like that.
I don't like the whole thing, actually, because architecture is about the basic cooking, okay? It's about the cut of steak, not the sauce. This is just the sauce you put on top of a cheap steak.
Yeah,
yeah, but there's
Well,
some
I think the
styles
sauce
where you
matters.
need there are some styles where you need sauce, the whole style's about the sauce, Whether you and I like it, that's different.
Right.
But
This is
there,
true.
there are, I mean, I'm with you. I like the steak. I don't want the sauce, but
And I like the sauce.
Well,
on it.
I don't see where the,
Exactly.
I don't see where the cornice,
like,
I'd just take cornices out then because.
well, I don't want it to. I think Vincent's point is it's too specific. Like,
But it's such as, it's just giving
Is
one
it a such
example
as?
style,
It's a
yeah.
such as.
And just so you know, this is general plan policy L 33.4
Oh, straight up.
verbatim. I mean, and I don't think it's gonna violate the general plan if we don't put cornices in, right? But it's just a such as, I don't care, one way or the other, really. I think it's just
Those are just
giving
examples of
ideas.
design elements.
Yeah.
Right.
So, all right.
We could put other embellishments if you want, but it already says design elements.
We'll have all the styrofoam window surrounds and stuccoed over.
We could put doodads and gewgaws. I'm sure that would make
I
Joe
like-
happy, yeah.
Well, but I mean, yeah.
I mean, this is such as.
Why do
It's
we
not-
give why
Right.
give those examples? I mean, why? I mean,
I'll tell ya.
architectural design elements is totally fine.
I gave them because I quit from the
I'll
job.
withdraw my complaint.
Okay.
I mean, it just makes their job a little bit harder in the sense of someone comes up and then has something stuck in their craw, and they're like, "Well, we gotta have." Says here cornices and like I think we were. I mean, you're just gonna have to explain like, well,
We
as
could
an
just,
example. Where
you can cut out, if you want, we can just cut out such as showcase windows, cornices, and columns. To read just the use of architectural design elements to provide interest along the sidewalk.
You
is
can say
encouraged.
elements and details or something,
Yeah.
and that's it.
I would like to leave windows in though, because I think the windows are an extremely important part of the design of buildings in the commercial zone.
But this is talking about showcase windows, which is
Yeah, and we
different.
already
Like the
say-
jeweler
Right.
has a
Right,
showcase
yeah, yeah,
window, that
yeah,
box
okay.
that sticks out.
Okay, so why don't we just leave those examples out? I didn't realize what that meant
Yeah.
exactly.
And the window thing, I think you have covered in one, which
Yeah.
is really like. That's
So we'll just say the use of architectural design elements and details to provide interest along the sidewalk is
Perfect.
encouraged.
Perfect,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, what I'm interested in here is the you know, when things first come to the counter, you know, I'd be interested to hear from Vincent seriously about how would it best be understood right at the first level of things at the counter, with or without the examples.
I think basically I would be looking at what the existing building, the architectural style of the existing building looks like and how that reads and how that would work with their business model. And really to see if they have, a lot of times they come in with, you know, a sketch of what they want to do. And I think this gives us a little bit more, by minimizing the language, will give us a little bit more latitude in terms of providing some direction, instead of pinpointing them or pointing them to a specific element, architectural element. So I think by making the change, I think it's going to be a little bit better and give us a little bit more latitude.
Well, then let's do it.
Okay. Okay. Because I mean, it's really got to start there, not when things get up to here. So I was really curious about which way does it work better for you. Thank you.
4 is great, 5 is great. Is 6 kind of for, where did that come from? There must be some properties that are commercial that have front yards that you could park in.
Well, you'll remember that this was an issue on the development of the Kensington. There was some issues with it. Some of the earlier models had it set back with parking in the front. There was also discussion about when Fresh and Easy was going to replace Howie's, that they were going to set it back and put big parking C in front.
Okay.
So we don't. I mean, that's obviously not pedestrian friendly. So
Now, where you get that from is like when you have a larger business organization, like Kensington's parent corporation or like Fresh and Easy. You know, they're coming to you basically with their standard. Their standard models. Okay, what works for them? When the developer for Kensington first showed up, you may recall that they were basically just presenting a model that was going to work, you know, as a standalone building out in the middle of a sea of asphalt out on Huntington Drive somewhere, you know, and then they very awkwardly pushed it toward the street because of the constraints we had here, and it, you know, it was just totally awkward. And the planning commission at the time actually, I think, did a good job of moving them toward
That was
towards
you.
something
Yeah.
that was basically, you know, changed their form a lot, and they got to pay attention to the
Right.
street and so forth. But you can get these organizations that'll come in with a model as something that's just, you know, this is how we do it commercially.
Well, to me, the big one.
It's a
would
mini
be
mall.
like how we-
It's the mini.
Oh, right, and
mini
it's-
mall.
But you know, you can also see the tea house could have put parking right in the front yard, right? I mean, if they're gonna preserve that building.
They could put, yeah.
Is
And
that
you don't want
Parking in front of lunch
next
there.
to Happy's? Is that like another lot?
Yeah,
Or
that's
is
a
it
separate-
part of Happy's? Like, is
Well,
that a front yard?
No, I don't think that's a front yard, because Happy's faces,
I know, face
It's
the
a side
boulevard.
but
yard. It's a side yard.
it is owned by Happy's. It's just-
Because I mean, you wouldn't do that now, like
No.
that.
I
if
hope
you-
not, no.
Meaning, like that would never be parking. It would actually be a business.
Right.
Right.
It is sort of sad that, you know, on two of the corners of the main intersection in town, we have parking.
Yeah.
And the third is a
Third's a
a gas station,
I know.
where we used to have a
Technically,
city
all
hall.
four corners are
California.
Right,
Well,
'cause Cursing Court-
Yeah.
Crossing Court behind, yeah.
Well, that's more like a park
Yeah.
lit. I don't know. What
Agreed.
Yeah, we have a parklet.
Yeah.
But,
Howie's actually, there's a vestige there of a market that goes back to the 1920s, and where it was a very, very new and novel idea as more and more people acquired automobiles to actually have an automobile court in the front. You can see some good examples of this. Like there's a beautiful restored one in South Pass. You know, it's been really ruined over the years. But if you go back and see the historic photographs, it was like there was something. I love. It's probably too far gone, but I'd love to be able to restore it to the way it was then. And so that's kind of a unique thing, just based on you know, history.
Barbara?
Barbara Lee Klein. I was going to say what I like to remember in Sierra Madre, that we're unique, that we have climb here on the boulevard. And so for obstructions, I'm always reminding people that as long as they have the head space and the cane space, then you're okay with whatever you put in front of the buildings. Otherwise, it's going to be obstructing. And I have to compliment also for the Kensington, to clarify, because that's in the downtown business district. Although it's a retirement home, the business front ties in with the business district. I just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
But I always keep climb in mind whenever going down the sidewalks, because you still have the individuals that are seeing impaired that get themselves around town independently.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, well, both in Title 24, the accessibility and section, and in ADA, technically they're virtually the same thing.
Yeah.
That's all very, very well defined, and so regardless of all else, if somebody did something that was really dangerous from an accessibility standpoint, like a blind person, you know, smacking their head on something, that's just going to be enforceable, all standing on its own.
Yeah, that's gonna be
So-
much more building code level than zoning code stuff.
Yeah, or you know, in the case of ADA, it's through the courts.
Right.
It's a civil rights thing.
All right.
Okay, moving on to D. D's, we've got a full landscaping section later, but this is sort of just more on the design of it. Signs in E are really covered in chapter 72, sorry. E is articulation, and this is a concept that we cribbed from R3 that applies to the back part of the building. And this is not the prime storefront area, which would go lot line to lot line.
Yeah.
But behind that, if you have office or residential, at that point, you'd want to have, well, first we'd have some 5-foot setbacks as we get to later, and then you'd have articulation
On the sides as well.
on the sides.
Yeah.
And the rear. I don't know if this applied to the rear. Did it?
Yes.
Outside of the.
Outside of the prime storefront area.
Okay. So it's
Where
all
did
the
you
other
get that
two
from?
things.
The articulation concept and these
Is in
dimensions
R3.
was from R3.
We added that to R3. So you don't end up with basically a box, once you take your setbacks. It was a method to reduce the bulk and massing of a multi-family structure,
So this is,
But
we,
the same idea could be.
yeah, I mean, we were thinking of, okay, so if it's the second story and you have offices or housing up there, then you want to have some articulation on the sides of
Oh,
the
yeah,
building.
I buy that, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking about it the other way, actually, that, if you look at, a couple of our big boxes in town, like Dr. Sammy's building, right? He's got that funny grill on the front of it, but the rest of it is just an extremely plain box. And this is where, the whole thing of leaving you more latitude, because you can't be telling people to put trellises and columns on the back side of the side of a building, but it's, it's kind of an awful presence just as a real plain box.
But one question here is,
So I think that something like this is really good. It gives you a way to.
what I'm missing or I'm not seeing is, if in the case where you do residential, mixed use kind of thing, does because in commercial the buildings can be 0 to 0
Right.
lot line to 0
There's a
lot line.
setback section later on.
Yeah,
If it gets to a residential part, does the thing have to completely
Mhm.
suck in 5 feet
Well,
or whatever?
it's not done by use, it's done by the prime storefront area. So you've got the prime storefront area, you've got 0 side yard, and then beyond that, it's 5 feet.
But we have a setback section later where it
Right.
talks
There
about
must
that.
be a
So
place
we'll
where it
come
talks
to
about
it,
it.
we'll
Okay.
come to it.
But again, it's done by prime storefront area versus
Yeah.
otherwise, rather than by use.
But then also you
Because-
got to consider the second story as well.
Right.
Like you won't have prime storefront area on the second floor.
Well, that's why it says prime storefront area and the second floor above it.
Can
So
go.
that is gonna go like this, and then when you get past 50 feet, you're gonna have setback and
So the
articulation.
second floor would have to be 50 feet. So you couldn't have windows on the sides there.
You could, but you're not required to.
If you have another building right there, you're not gonna.
Yeah, you're not gonna want to. I mean, and that's the big thing is we started thinking about, the idea of setting those back and having articulation and light and air and the whole thing. But if you've got a 2-story somebody on your neighbor that's all the way up, that's a pretty pathetic setback, and you're probably just gonna push it over.
Yeah, I mean you run into some issues there, but we maybe don't need to get into that.
Well, look, it's kind of like this. Think about it this way. We know as architects that there's a lot of things that zoning just doesn't say anything about, but we have our own professional responsibility to know that what's going to fly and what isn't based on building code down the line. Months later when we're actually going for a building permit.
Well, my only
check, right?
concern, and I don't even.
And that's where
it's
the
not even worth
setbacks-
bringing up, but it's the idea of if you're going to have residential use on a second floor, and you block out that 50 feet where you can't have any side articulation. It's really hard to put like your egress windows and things where
Well,
you
it's not
need
like you
fire
can't, you're not
exit.
Keep in mind, it's
required.
not- you can't.
Okay.
It's not prohibited, it's just
So
not
you could
required.
suck in that.
Sure,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
could, and keep in mind also, if someone's actually building that on the second floor,
Yeah.
they're gonna be popping into full design review, and we're gonna have all the design review findings.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that's just to say that, there's gonna be situations where you've got the 0 lot line neighbor, and you're
Exactly.
gonna wanna go over.
Yeah, that's all I was getting at was that whether they say anything or don't say anything, you know as a design professional that if you're going to have residential up there, you're going to have a second floor, you are going to suck in at that point. You're going to do it voluntarily or just so that you're in compliance with the building code, which comes sometime after
Right, if
we're
you
all
wanna
done
have
with
any
it.
fenestration on it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a
Um,
non-issue.
Well, that's a
Um,
good thing to add, though. So
So, and then we can just crib the diagram from R3.
yeah.
Now, views is something that we added, and there's general discussion of this in the general plan, but there's not a particular concept. But this was something that, in a lot of different forums we've been to, we've heard, and so we tried to craft something that would help us have some ability to protect views, but not be overly onerous, because, you know, you could really cut into the buildability if you wanted to go too far in preservation of views. So
But this
hopefully we
really
got
affects
a
the
balance.
north side properties.
Well, it affects everything, but I think to a certain extent, north is more,
Yeah,
and
from
it's
the-
really the second floor.
Mhm.
So
Because there also are valley views, which
Yeah.
I very much enjoy going up the street, you know? So there's only one view here.
No, I'd leave, I think that's very good. There's obviously gonna be, you know, anything that has the potential for blocking views like that is probably gonna wind up here for full design review anyway, isn't it?
second
Probably
floor.
gonna be
Yeah,
two
the second
stories.
Second floor would.
Yeah, okay, so they're going to be here. We're going to be able to look at it, and it's so just the way it's stated. You know, it's this plus discretionary review is just
Okay.
really fine, and it's going to give us the ability to shortstop anything that is really going to be, you know, completely unctuous.
So the next thing there is, boy, would it be nice to have some diagrams.
I saw that.
Oh, thanks for volunteering,
Waiting to
Manish.
be asked. So nice to be needed.
Got some?
Would you please do that?
Yeah, I was just trying to I was thinking through my head what it'll look a lot like the one for E, but
Vertical.
I'm just it's one of those things I don't want to show. I think we can show like the examples you've stated here
Mhm.
and kind of leave it at that.
Yeah. I don't.
So like
we don't
it's
want,
either like you suck the second floor in from the ground facade,
Mhm.
or you suck in the sides, or you don't build it as high as you
Right.
could, or something.
Mhm.
So those
and
would
we
be-
don't even need to have all of them. I mean, just a couple. I
Yeah, I
would
think
be
we
good.
should show.
But I mean, you can really imagine where they put residential above, that you've got sort of the res as a front patio. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
And it would provide this kind of view protection.
Useful view of the 4th of July parade.
Yeah. You could rent that out, right? Okay.
For the 3 people that aren't actually in the parade.
Right.
No kidding.
Moving on to G, I think this was pretty much takeover language. And then the second G, which probably should be H, is a similar language we put in R3 that we can someday do design guidelines.
But in G here, like 1 and 2, it applies to all. Okay, does G the following apply to all development in the C, and the stuff we just went through applies to new development?
No, I mean,
Does this apply to? Does this list of stuff?
everything applies to only to new. I mean, new or modifications. We're not
Okay.
going to force anyone to change their building.
Okay. So is G2 not a repeat, but is some of those concepts, or did we already?
Yeah, it's sort of redundant,
Is it redundant?
a little
A little
bit, but
I don't think it does harm to
Okay.
have
I
them
just
in
want to
again.
make sure it's not. I mean, it's intentional.
Yeah.
To kind of have that.
it's
like
intentional.
repeating.
It's intentional in the sense that it was redundant originally, and we didn't take the time to figure out which ones.
Well, no,
to
because
remove
earlier
back.
you talked about building materials.
Right.
You know, and here it's
Well, that's
listed
it.
as
It
building
has-
materials.
It has more things in
And the
it.
first time you listed it was better because it was descriptive. Like you
Mhm.
kind of said, okay, this is what we mean by building materials. You know,
Mhm.
use stuff like this. And
I think
here
this
it's
is
just a
kind of
list.
It's like a catch-all
Okay.
of other stuff that was in there before and we didn't change it. You think it needs more?
Well,
or-
I'm wearing my hat of trying to find a bust a loophole. So that's what I'm looking at this like is does
Mhm.
this give me some freedom to kind of like they didn't say anything about it earlier, and here there's lists, so I can.
I don't think you're going to get any of that because, again, these are guidelines,
Yeah. Okay.
and we're gonna do a design review, and
This is
so
I think this is mostly talking about compatibility with
Right.
adjacent development.
These
That's
are
what
the
it's about.
I
It's
the
emphasizing that.
Yeah.
the concepts that you want to think about when you're doing a compatibility review. Okay, moving on to res. Are you itching for a break?
Like in 20 minutes.
Okay.
Break.
Does that work with everybody? Okay. So, and the residential section, what we did is we say all residential uses in the R3 are allowed, and SROs outside the prime storefront area.
Mhm.
So in the
Okay.
first 50 feet, you can't go. And we said they're even prohibited except for, access ways. And then B is 13 units to the acre. That's from Measure B.
Mhm.
And then there's a little bit of, compatibility language. I think I took this language from long ago when we used to have a mixed use provision in our commercial code. But what I didn't do was start talking about separate design concepts for res.
You just kick it back.
Because the thought was we sort of want the downtown area to look like the downtown area and not, the structures not to change dramatically based on use. And if that's not the way we want to go, then we need to bake in a lot more here with regard to how we want the residential uses to look.
And my feeling about this was that we wanted it to look more like a commercial zone than like a residential zone, right? Because this is a commercial zone, so that if you build a residential building, it should look more like the commercial.
I mean, I don't think there's any concern here, like, people are gonna pop in single-family
Right.
dwellings. I think it's gonna
Yeah.
be all multi-unit stuff that
Mhm.
comes in, R3 kind of stuff, and it's gonna look like, well, it can't look like stuff in Pasadena only because of the height, but, I
Right.
mean, you're basically gonna build, as many units as you can, or 13 per acre, and so it's gonna look commercially,
Mm-hmm.
but residential that's in a commercial kind of
Right,
thing.
and
So
I think
they're
that-
apartments, or
The thought is the stuff that's above and behind is gonna look pretty much the same whether it's office or residential.
Right.
And in fact, it might transition in uses because it's not built specifically for one use.
Yeah.
And I think we actually see that in some of the places, like Renaissance Court has some of the upper floors that were much more residential that have sort of transitioned to office or commercial.
which is a good
uses.
point. I mean, that allows its flexibility. Like,
Mm-hmm.
If you think about all the different kinds of situations we have here, and you might find like a residential courtyard like on the backside of a building that has a commercial face on it, right? And like if it were something that abutted the Mariposa parking field, for instance, there'd be plenty of ability to enter, from there and a courtyard and go up, and we could do something where we would each pick a site, a theoretical site, and try it, and we'll see how many different kinds of configurations. I think that we're talking so much here about the generic situation, like, is it going to look like is your apartment going to look like an office on the outside? Worry about that.
Well, I mean, the location is Howie's. That's the location.
That's the location that there's the
But
issue with
there's a
this.
potential for development that could be this development,
mixed
you know.
use or something.
A mixed-use thing with apartments, something
Would that
upstairs,
would that
two-story.
have to be a specific plan,
No.
or it wouldn't? So,
It wouldn't have to be.
but it would be a full review
Oh, yeah,
here,
yeah.
of course.
But I mean, that's the most likely location,
Right,
Yeah, okay, there
thinking
you go.
about locations.
There you go.
right?
I mean, I've
That's what
seen
I'm thinking.
what you're talking about done very successful actually in Monrovia, where, I mean, off Myrtle, they have like alleys, pedestrian alleys that have been refurbished where the residential spills out onto the alley. But
Yeah.
on this side is commercial, like banks and stuff, and then this half is residential, facing more residential, but they have their own street, almost a pedestrian street.
right.
So I mean, that's totally
Mhm.
doable, but I think it's gonna look more in fitting with the commercial zone
Right.
than it is
Yeah.
like a series of houses, you know?
So we're all on the same page that we
Yeah, I
don't
think
wanna
so.
go start
Yeah,
having different design thoughts for res.
yes.
But when it gets to res, what do they do? Do they just, I mean, they just bump to R3 development? I mean, or they just,
Same
do
development
whatever-
standards as
whatever.
here, but I think you're gonna, outside the prime storefront area, you're gonna build differently, whether it's res or office.
yeah.
There'll be a lot of opportunity with a site like Howie's site to, you know, to have design input on it. I mean, look at all the changes that the Kensington went through by the time it was finally let go of.
Yeah,
You know, remember when it was a huge farmhouse, and people were like, "You got to be kidding." We will have that. Will be a unique situation, and we will have the opportunity in there.
Right.
Yeah, I think you don't want to.
Let's see, Barbara, do you wanna chime in?
Barbara Lee Klein. It is unique. I know that Kensington, uh, they didn't have to do the additional 10 parking spaces, which is apparent sometimes when I'm trying to go to a council meeting, the parking out front is crowded, and I'm thinking, great, the place is crowded. Nope, Kensington parks across the street. Anyway, 23013, since the majority of the downtown business district is already 230, the 13 units would be, you know, interesting, but where does the parking come in?
Well, we have a separate parking section, but
Yes, because since the city doesn't really own that parking lot, either parking lot, I don't know from the CRA funds that have been, you know, returned, it's gonna be interesting to find out where the parking does come in.
Well, they'd have
Howie's
to-
is
they
a
would be
different story. I
required
think
to-
that's reverse corner lot.
They're
Thank-
required to provide parking on the site
Yeah.
as
But-
required.
Parking for 13 units?
They have to provide it.
well, they have to.
It's required.
They would have to provide parking for whatever they do.
So maybe the shuttle to Arcadia?
No,
Oh,
no, they
no,
would
no,
have
they
to
would
provide
just
parking on
optional
site for
parking.
whatever they build.
And by the way,
you
all
think
of the
Going
commercial
above
zone is in
30
Measure
feet,
B.
you mean?
No, not
30,
going above
13.
30 feet.
It could
they
be
would have to-
subterranean.
It could either be subterranean or they have to
I think there's an ordinance,
reduce
hopefully there's
the-
still an ordinance for no subterranean. It should still be in.
Oh, no, they can do subterranean.
They have to
Oh, no,
reduce
no,
the
I don't
size
know.
of
I'm
the
gonna have to bring
building
all
to
my
allow
old
for
general plan.
parking.
No, there's prohibitions on subterranean parking in R2, but there's
In Measure B, sure, especially since they tried to do it with the Howie's, the old green frog. That was fought really hard.
I don't think there's any prohibition to subterranean parking in Measure B.
Yes, there is. I have it at home. I'll be
Well,
happy
that's for
to
another
bring
day.
some copies
Yeah,
in.
it's not,
another
it's,
day.
it's not worth talking
Yep.
about.
All the information for CEQA also, if you're interested in having all those
Sure.
steps. Thanks.
Okay, then moving on,
May I ask one
Yeah.
last question here? Residential uses shall be incorporated into projects to provide compatibility. Is that making it mandatory that any new commercial construction is got to have a residential
no,
component?
the point is that,
Shall is
those-
a mandatory term.
yeah, but it's not that it's not that they shall be incorporated, period. It's
If
that
you
it's,
have it.
It's that if you have them, they're incorporated to provide compatibility between residential and non-residential uses.
Because if you choose to add residential, then you get kicked to this section.
All right.
But this isn't requiring you to have residential.
But what it is requiring you is to provide compatibility between residential and non-residential uses, and to minimize the effects of
But you-
noise, odor, glare, and vehicle.
This is a whole different section. So if you're in the commercial section, the minute you decide this is going to be mixed use, we're going to do commercial, storefront, whatever, and then we're going to have a residential component to it. Okay, boom. Then you do need to go to this section.
Got that? Sure.
But prior to that, you don't. Like if you just did all commercial, you would never come here.
Yeah, you just don't have the exhaust from the large commercial grill going right into somebody's window.
The only time this applies is if you have a mixed-use project.
You mean like if there was residential above Kentucky Fried Chicken?
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Well, maybe the wording is a bit strange, which is
Even if it said I know this would be too informal
Well, could
for
we-
zoning. It said any residential uses should be in that.
Or residential
We could
uses
just,
that
we could
are-
take out the word be incorporated into projects.
Well,
we
you
should
say
say-
residential uses that are incorporated into
Or we could
projects,
just
'cause
say-
then that's
Yes.
the only case
Yeah.
where,
That's,
when they're incorporated,
Will
you need to do
provide.
this.
that solves the problem right there.
Yeah, but we could just
That's what
cross it
you're
out. Residential uses shall provide compatibility.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Residential uses shall provide compatibility, okay.
I guess the issues that the uses don't provide the compatibility.
No.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of language to,
Okay. We'll tweak this offline. I understand the issue. But it is certainly not meant to say that you have to have rest. Okay, moving on. The size of the minimum lot, that's just for subdivision, so that's not gonna be much of an issue. 3670 is the setbacks. So here we have front yards. So there's no front yard for the, on a main commercial street is required. And then non-residential uses have a minimum front yard of 5 feet and res a minimum of 15 feet. And the 15 feet echoes the R3
Well, you said elsewhere, meaning, so if it's not on the main,
commercial street.
so like the offshoots, then
Yeah.
you're.
Right,
5 feet.
and that's mostly gonna apply in, the eastern third of Montecito. Because if you remember, you drive down Montecito, it transitions to
Like apartment.
full res.
Full res,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then there's there's this discussion about, in the general plan about allowing outdoor dining, so we tag that in here.
Oh, there's a side yard thing, okay.
Okay. So side yards is where we talked about before. No side yards shall be required adjacent to prime storefront areas or the second floor above them. Elsewhere, side yards shall be not less than 5 feet. So we have the main storefront area, and then we truncate down
Yeah.
to the 5
But
at
if
the
you
back.
wanted it, because you had res up there, you could. This doesn't
yes.
preclude you from doing it.
Right.
yeah, so,
And per the other section, you're gonna have to articulate some anyhow.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have some parts that are more than 5. Yeah. We all good with that? Rear yard is 15, but you can use it for parking. That's the same as before.
Okay.
And then we added this concept of,
Oh, to R1.
the, angle plane next to R1. And we can crib the diagram there too.
Oh, yep, perfect, okay.
And then E is the encroachments. The encroachments 1 through 4, we just cribbed from R3. But we added this 5th one, which allows a little flexibility with an additional finding. And so we wanted to flag this just so people could see. And one of the issues there was because the setbacks are a little weird, where you have the main storefront as 0 and then you truncate back, you could imagine situations where that system's not going to work so well. And so we wanted to bake in a little bit of flexibility so someone wouldn't have to try to get a variance. So like, let's say you were up against a building that was 60 feet, 0 lot line, right? And you went 50 feet and then you had this little 5-foot notch, that thing would be pretty worthless,
Oh, okay.
right? And so with this provision, we'd allow you to just match that for the 60 feet instead of the 50. And I'm sure there's a lot of other possibilities, we're not thinking about. But what it also does is it would require a full design review permit. So even if they could have done it lower ways, if they want that flexibility on the setback, they'd have to come to us to look at it.
So if they're doing the less than 500, but they didn't want that, then they'd have to
Right.
upgrade to the full design.
Yeah.
Or they would just put in that
Or they just put in that weird little notch, yeah.
smoking corridors.
Yeah, the junk chute,
Trash
Junk shoot.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Okay. Let's see, let's get the coverage and floor area done, and then we can do a break.
I have a question about this.
Yeah.
So does a drain count as a permeable surface? So if you have a great big area that drains to a central drain and gets rid of water, is that whole area counted as a permeable surface?
If the drain goes into the storm drain, no. If it goes into a catchment area where it's percolated, then yes.
Like a dry well or something.
So the reason that I'm asking is the one that we just approved a couple weeks ago on 94 North Baldwin, right? There's no way that it complies with this, right?
Right.
So we're saying that everybody's gonna have to come for a variance, because almost all the commercial buildings.
Well, only if they build a new one. It's an existing building.
Yeah, I think
Right.
that this is for new, right?
Is this only for new?
New development.
Well, yeah, but the thing is,
Because everything that's existing is pre-existing non-conforming.
but the other thing is, you've got two different concepts here. The one was before we just had coverage, which used to be 80%, and we've moved that down to 65. But really, this has changed from an issue of building mass to permeability, and then we have an FAR concept which covers the building mass issue. So the permeableness of things is not as hard to capture, and a lot of this stuff actually is probably going to be more stringent in the what's it called, the water.
Stormwater management.
LID.
Yeah, the LID. And so, one of the things you can do is you can capture the rainfall from your roof and put it down into a catchment, and then the whole building doesn't count as covered on this. And there's also permeable asphalt now. So it used to be just that grasscrete stuff.
Yeah.
Now they just have asphalt that's permeable that the water drains
Yeah,
through.
the problem with that is that it tends to clog after a while, and but there's still, first of all, with the LID, I think you only really need to have a bioswale or something equivalent for like 5% of your impermeable surface area.
Well, there's
It
a
isn't
bunch.
really that big, and my limited experience so far is that you can accomplish that within the otherwise required landscaping, if you place it for drainage and your runoff and everything the right way.
Right, you have the,
If this applies to
But
only
that's the
new, then that
question.
assuages my concern.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what.
it's only for new.
are we good on that?
So
Is that-
they would not have had to comply with this because they were
They're not
already
Building a
existing?
new building,
Well, they weren't altering,
if they're not altering the structure.
well,
do they
would they
do?
have? Because if it would've gone over 500 square feet,
Well,
like
were
that
they
back,
asking
that
over
back patio. That was new, right?
Yeah, the back patio area
And
was
all the
new.
stuff in the front.
Back patio area was on the second floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to the extent they expanded, expanded coverable space, then they would need to comply.
And the only
Right.
expansion was that balcony
In the
Right.
back,
in the back, right?
over the second.
And that's not,
Coming off the
that's not
second
covered
floor,
because it
right?
come under.
And then in the front, they're putting up an awning in essence, so that wouldn't.
But the other thing is, they're gonna redo the parking in the back, so they could easily comply with this by making the parking in the back, just have it, either permeable pavement or drain into the
Corner.
landscaped areas and soak in.
Just go to, Gunnell Lumber on Colorado. Go take a look at how they handle their parking adjacent to the street. You pull in, you park, you come in, and then you park, facing the sidewalk. Just look at the permeable block that they use, and then the bioswale and so forth. It really isn't, it's kind of interesting It's kinda interesting the way it captures that parking lot water.
Yeah,
What-
this particular lot, though, is a great example of where you can't drain like that, because the whole thing goes backwards
You gotta-
to the fence
Yeah.
and the blacktop.
Well,
So that's
what
why
I-
this is a really good example that I was thinking of. But if we're saying that anybody who's going to take on a project where they have to come before us is gonna have to take on a big enough project to go ahead and either permeable surface it or make it so that there's some kind of a conforming culvert to drain into. then-
Or, I mean, this only applies if they want to go over the gross area that's permitted to them.
So there's probably a bunch of buildings that are already that way, right?
Well, if they already exist, it doesn't matter. It's the only thing about
Well,
it.
it does matter. So here's an example. If you aren't built all the way up to the lot line,
Yeah.
and that's what we want, and you elect to do that, and it exceeds 500 feet, and you already have completely covered, so I'm thinking of like Village Pizza, right? Completely blacktop on the back. So they would now have to, they wouldn't be able to add without doing significant more in the back to the parking area. That's what we're saying, is that we're adding more cost onto somebody who's going to conform to what we want on the front in the back.
Well, to tack on to Thomas's question is, what is the trigger? Is it the 500, like insignificant exterior alteration? That's the, because anything below that doesn't even.
No, they'd
Sorry.
still have
What's
to
the trigger
comply
for this?
because this is not a subjective thing that would be the design
So
review.
Any alteration that adds any square
That
footage.
adds impermeable surface.
Well, what's
That's everything.
That's everything.
Oh, no, but he did bring up that if you drain the water off of the surface that you're adding, that then it doesn't count towards that total. So that would be the other way around it, you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you do rain barrel.
You know,
I mean, that's,
before we take this too far, I wonder what other commissions or staff in the city might be doing about the rainwater capture issue. I mean, I've talked with people in Public Works about you know, capturing off of curbs, running down the hill. It may be that there's other kinds of development going on in the city that we shouldn't be writing our own little thing and you know, and maybe being at odds or not doing it as comprehensively as somebody else might be doing. So,
But
could
this
we-
has got to apply at a higher rate because you have it in section A here that talks about, part of the concept is before we were allowing you 80%. Like if this is your lot, you know, and this is your 80% building, now we're saying you can't do 80%, you can only do 65% lot coverage, right?
Unless you do
So
something.
now you've got more area of the lot that's exposed essentially. So you're tying this into that, right? It's saying shall not
Well, see,
exceed 65%.
It was
Oh,
80,
no,
now
that's-
we're saying 65, but things that are permeable or have that do these things are in
excluded?
addition to, yeah.
yeah, are
in addition
excluded.
to the
Okay.
65.
So yeah, I mean, the thing is, you could just do a rain catchment system on your roof, and you could cover the whole
Yeah.
lot. Of course, then you'd violate the FAR, but that's a different
Yeah.
issue, right?
What can the rain catchment on the roof exceed the 30 feet? Right?
No.
You,
I just want to say real fast though that going back to the tea house example, just as an aside, I would take that concept like they had at Canal, and I would put it down at the bottom of the hill, way at the back of their property, and just let everything run right down into that. Okay, so really, it would be very easy to solve the thing on that particular.
Yeah, my goal is, and now that I've realized that it's any time you cover anything more, which is necessarily by design, any reason you'd come see.
Yeah, it would be a decent sized project. It wouldn't be like the existing.
Yeah, I was thinking it was a decent sized project, but I'm hearing that it's not. If you add 4 square feet, you've covered more permeable area, and you are now subject to this.
Yeah, if you exceed the thing, yeah.
If you exceed 65.
But keep in mind, flat work doesn't require a building permit. So if someone's putting in a sidewalk, they're just gonna put it in. No one's gonna, and it gets back to the whole code
It's gonna be
right?
worse than color.
No one's gonna police that.
Sure, and it's, to be totally clear, it's just a small addition in a commercial zone.
Which is valid.
Trying to think of what our existing commercial zone looks like, right?
Right.
When I think our commercial zone, I think from the hair salon around through Kirsten,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
they're, in every direction, they have maximized the
Yeah.
space. If any of them want to do any kind of an addition, no matter how small, they're gonna be running up against this. And so that was where my train of thought was.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they would.
I mean, your example of Village Pizza is perfect. Like, yeah, if they did anything to the back, and
Yeah, they
it's
can't
pretty
add-
much built out. It's a box, right?
Yep.
I think they would exceed 65 because I don't know what that lot is, but there isn't much left. So.
And
yeah.
the way they would have to address that is they'd have to capture the rain off the additional part, and they'd put a rain barrel. I mean, it's not, the thing is, you're right, it would capture them, it would apply to them, but it's not, the problem of being caught in this and complying with it is not that horrendously costly. And you even get free rain barrels from the water district, so.
All right.
Okay. B is the FAR, which is from the general plan at 100%. And the height is from 30 feet, which has not changed, and it's also limited by Measure B. And then section 1736-100 is parking, which is probably a good time to take a break before we dig into that.
Let's take a short
So,
break.
So where does that leave us on this thing about the permeable surface? I mean, we happy in the end with how that is, or what?
I'm going to reserve the right to think on it.
Yeah.
I like where your head's at with the idea that there is a really, I mean, it's greater than zero, but you put gutters around and drain it into a barrel and that's covered. So I do see that there's an affordable solution, but I want to think about that as a hurdle.
Yeah, definitely.
And staff is considering even increasing that threshold from 500 to something higher, because it is quite expensive and imposing if we look at residential projects.
In non-residential, though,
requirement.
the barrels don't
Yeah.
make any sense.
In commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are hard to, they always get
I mean,
knocked
if
over.
it's your house, you use it voluntarily to water your garden, okay, and it's a
Yeah,
lot pure. It's a lot purer than what comes out of the hose anyway, right? Because it doesn't have chemicals in
What do
it.
you do with that water at the back of your
Yeah.
fresh
Well,
rainwater?
That's answer A,
Probably
when
come
it
back
does
and
rain.
discuss that.
Answer B is that on Saturday or Sunday morning,
Cook with it.
when nobody's staff isn't around, City Hall's closed, there's nobody to police it. Yeah, exactly. Turn on the tap.
Okay, let's table this section then, and let's take a break, and then we'll dig into parking.
Right. You know they're gonna use it.
the 1736 100 parking, A, off-street parking. Now for this, what we've added is parking for the residential to mirror the R3. If you remember that in the general parking section, 1768, we have 2 covered spaces for each residential. But in R3, we said only 1 for studios or 1 bedrooms. So we did that in item 1. But we also included SROs, which are basically studios. And then we added this one thing, and this is one thing we flagged because we really want to talk to people about it, is that would require no parking for an SRO that's an affordable unit. That's what that BMR unit means. Because there's nothing really that differentiates an SRO from just a studio apartment. Sort of like, what's sort of the point? And this maybe would encourage somebody to actually build one of those so we can get them in our arena numbers.
Yeah.
But it's a change, so we really wanted everyone to focus on it.
Or that no parking. Yeah, no, I think that's a good concept. Yeah, it's incentivizing that. So
I don't think we're going to get very many of them. So I don't think it's going to cause a giant parking.
well, and it's only one. You would require one
Right.
space, right?
Right, and so if somebody built 3 of them,
Well,
we
no
would be
parking
short
shall be
3
required.
spaces. So.
No, there'd be no parking space. You wouldn't
No,
even.
no, I know, but
I know, but it would be
otherwise,
short.
if you didn't have
Yeah.
that,
It'd be
an
1 per
SRO would
unit.
require one.
One
Yes.
unit, 1 per unit.
Okay.
Yeah, I can think of 3 people right off that I saw tonight down in Kirsten Court who are down there all the time, and they live in little jobs around the city. Don't have automobiles, you know.
There you
It's but there's probably enough of them to justify it.
Well, we'll see if that ever happens.
We'll see. We'll see what the reaction is.
Yeah. Barbara?
Really Klein, if it's low income, then would you have to use the police department to then not have them buy overnight parking vouchers or monthly vouchers?
They would
If they're
not,
not gonna have a parking space, then then they won't be required to have vouchers from the police department? I mean,
No. I don't think we would require them to not have cars. The expectation is that,
not to have a parking space.
the expectation is we would not require parking spaces to have, and that the people living there would probably not have cars. But if they did, they would be treated just like anyone else who lived in a place that had a car and didn't have available parking.
Yeah.
Except they would
Because
have
you-
extra square footage, but they wouldn't have to provide on-site parking, so they'd have an advantage.
Except that it's 13
Yeah.
units per acre, and so you can't have that many units anyway.
Well,
And it's an SRO, so you can only have one, and it has to be occupied by an owner, right?
no,
the
it's
main
not.
house?
No, that's second
SRO.
unit.
Oh, that's- I'm
SRS
sorry, that's for the
It,
second.
but this only also applies to affordable. So
It's
it
only
means
for
low
affordable.
income.
Below market rate housing.
Affordable.
It doesn't say low or what. It's
It says
just
it's
below
market
but
rate.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it would be
There is a threshold.
it would be mod low and very low.
Yeah.
So they would have enough money then to get the parking. I'm being facetious, by the way, you know,
Well, I
they're
mean,
not gonna
if-
have bikes, but they have a car,
I
have enough money to pay for a parking monthly,
Right.
yearly,
It's not that much.
right, but they just will get the free spot as long as they have the money to, you get where I'm going there with this, right? I mean, I really don't know why they're having an exception. It shouldn't be an exception. Parking's kind of tough in this town.
Okay. Then moving on to section B, this is the section where we baked in some parking relief in certain circumstances through administrative review, which is very similar to the concept that we had in non-conforming. And that was just approved by the city council, and nobody seemed to have any unction about it. And it might be because they didn't focus on it, but I know that I at least talked to one council member offline, and he was fine with it. So I think, I don't think it was just they glossed over it. I think it was something that didn't cause a lot of problems. So you would do a minor CUP with the same additional finding that we had in the non-conforming, that that the parking deficit would not unreasonably overload street parking or public parking facilities nor create a nuisance. So concepts 1 and 2 are currently similar things to that are in our parking code now.
Except that in 2, we don't want to have arraignments, we want to
Yeah.
have arrangements.
That happens somewhere
Yes.
else too. but-
Yeah.
Spell check that one.
Yeah, spell
There's-
check, yeah.
No, there's a few other spots with that exact.
Yeah,
same
okay,
thing.
global then. Yeah.
Speaking for the lawyer sitting next to me.
Yeah.
Forget the section.
This is when your subcommittee members don't catch this till later so they can gotcha. Yeah, so those concepts are there now, but I think if memory serves, the parking section requires a study. And one of the things we say is that we have the ability to require, but we're not gonna make them do it unless we need it. Because if they built out the Howie site, we'd want that, right?
Yeah.
But if it's one little tiny thing,
A lot.
you can use sort of common sense on.
And in the section you're talking about, the language that says, or other reasonable
Right.
materials and evidence, I like so much better than just a traffic study.
Right. Buy a licensed guy, I mean, that's gonna be $5,000,
Right.
right? And so, so 3 is live work concept, and this was like the dentist that we approved. And somehow we fudged it and didn't make him before, but that parks it in. Sidewalk or outdoor dining, and this sort of codifies the concept where we allow sidewalk dining without parking and expands it to outdoor dining, which for some reason we require tons of parking, but we require none for sidewalk. And both of these are encouraged by the general plan. So,
So like Nano Cafe, we wouldn't count the spots that are outside because that's
no, it's not
outdoor
that we
dining?
don't, it's not that we don't count it. It's that we would allow with discretionary review them to have less than required
Okay.
if it works out. So it's not like it's a big zero. It's that there would be, there's an ability for flexibility with
For instance,
discretionary
Tea
review.
shop that
Yeah.
we
For
recently
instance,
saw,
the tea shop.
When
you know.
Right, right, when,
that front area will become more.
right. It was more I was trying to understand outdoor versus sidewalk.
Mhm.
So Nano has outdoor,
But it's
Right.
not in the
Beantown
sidewalk.
has sidewalk.
Right.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So there are a number of uses that are encouraged in the general plan. And so we listed some of those that encourage specialty retail, selling products local. And so as one of the ways that we can incent those, we could potentially provide some parking relief. 6 is adaptive reuse, which is really somewhat redundant of what we already have in non-conforming, but it brings it here so people can see it. And then 7 is sort of a catch-all, and the language there is, I mean, it's just sort of an ability to, where we can't think of a situation, but it gives us some flexibility if somebody comes up. And if this were a project that we were reviewing, then the parking review would come to us as well. But if it's a smaller one, then it could just be done at the director's level. So this is the basically where we went on parking, and then the follow-on in B is the information that we have the ability to request, but not a requirement that it's provided.
In B1 through 7,
Yes.
these are all circumstances that we would modify the parking requirement if you met some of this.
Right.
But for any of those, you would have to, the parking demand study would be required if you're trying to get
No, the
relocation.
parking
It
demand
could
study,
be-
it could be required,
Be required.
but it's not, it's.
May
it-
require.
If
Yeah.
we're not comfortable, we could send it back and ask
May
for it.
require.
Right.
May
Oh, okay.
require. So it isn't absolutely required.
And so it gives us some proportionality, because in the live work case of the dentist who lived there and he worked at his thing, he didn't need one. I
Or
mean,
the
that was
optometrist.
self-evident,
It's
right?
like the optometrist. We really didn't need a parking study
Well, no.
for the optometrist.
It's a good
I
one.
think the answer is most of these little things we won't,
No.
right? If they redevelop the Howie site, we will, so.
But right
Um,
now, how does that happen? Because this would be like if they came here and presented their project, and we're like, no, you don't need to do that. It
Well,
would
it'd
be
be at
kind of
the
after the fact,
staff
because right
level.
now,
Staff would
so
decide.
they would decide basically.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it warranted that.
But
And
I
if-
think
And if they
it-
didn't think it did and we did, we could say, no, we need a
Okay.
parking.
Yeah.
I think we could trust them to.
And if staff
decide.
told them that they needed a study and then we said they didn't, that's too bad. It's too late at that point, we got a study. And then C is just sort of more designing about where it goes. And we have one part where we don't like the front yard. We can just take the parenthetical out if you don't like that, if you think front yard is good enough. Because
I think front yard is.
I think front yard is good enough.
Okay. Sometimes adding more makes it more confusing, so.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all we did on the parking, is to provide some flexibility. We didn't, like I said, attack the parking numbers themselves or the categories. To me, it seems like one idea might be is just to have one parking number for the prime storefront area and then one parking number for the rest, and say that's it. Instead of saying this much for a restaurant, this much for Pilates studio, this much for bowling alley. But we didn't go there, and, you know, I don't know if we, I think we've got enough to chew on here, and that sounds like another bite later.
Where does this send you, though? You have to go to the parking section.
You have to go to the parking section, and you have to
figure
look
that
up,
out.
you need so many spaces for your Pilates studio, so many spaces for your
Okay.
bowling alley, so many spaces for your restaurant.
So, I know we're gonna leave that for later, but it's one of those things where right now that could still be a bugaboo for certain businesses.
Yeah.
Get caught up in that. Like, let's just take the Pilates studio. Like, we did all this work here to kind of relax and be a little more lenient to allow a business like that to come in. But they're still gonna have to deal with the parking.
Right.
As it currently is, right? And,
so-
that may just kill it.
Well, but look, I think that what you're saying, if I understand this correctly, is that we're only talking here about the configuration of things, not the numbers that are involved. The numbers have to
They're in the parking section.
have to be in the parking in the parking ordinance.
This is still gonna refer you back to the parking section, which
Right.
we're gonna come back.
Yeah,
and
but
fix.
this,
So then
but
we
all
don't
we're
have to
dealing
hard
with
code
here.
The numbers.
I'm
in.
just saying if there's a huge disconnect between, and I know this is something on our docket, but we do all this work to basically promote business, to take, small businesses. And then this thing out here still kind of kills that opportunity because it's gonna require 10 spots
But
or something.
but this provides some flexibility. I mean, let's take an example where a business that the general plan encourages, right? Say a specialty retail store that sells
Local goods.
products from local artisans and craftsmen.
Sure.
And you do the math on the parking section, it says you need 12 spaces.
Okay.
And the project provides 10, right?
They would actually be able to do it.
That they don't meet. So what they could do then is they could come back under this section through a minor conditional use permit and say, look, we qualify under number 4, or I'm sorry, number 5. They should pick the right number. And, we're pretty close, and the reason why we don't need to do all of the 12 and we can get by in 10 is A, B, C, D, and E. And we do a parking study, or we don't, or we have some other reasonable evidence, and we say, yeah, 10's good enough. We have that flexibility. But to the extent that the 12 number is based on funny math, this doesn't get to that.
Yeah.
But it gives us a discretionary double check
Yeah.
on it.
Well, and that example's good because they wouldn't have been able to, if we didn't have this, they would have just been
Yeah.
dead on
They
arrival.
would have had to apply for a variance.
Yes.
Yeah, we just have to follow,
would've left.
we just
They
have
would've
to
left. Yeah,
they
follow
would've left.
through with a good parking ordinance then. That'll work with this. This is just saying, I'm
That's
sorry, you
fine.
can't park on the roof, okay? That you can't do this, you can't do that as far as the form, the configuration of your
Well, it
building.
also reduces the requirement a little bit, so that
It gives
does affect the
flexibility
number.
for
But
reductions.
we're gonna follow through with a thoughtful, with thoughtful work on the parking ordinance too, and we're not gonna do a nice job here and then kill them with the numbers later on. I know.
No, I know
gonna
we're
do
not.
that.
It's just one of those things like if they're too far apart, they.
Well, yeah,
but,
I mean, I'm
that's a whole
thinking
nother
also about the non-conforming thing that we just did that had a parking thing in
Yeah.
it.
Right.
And some of that could also apply here.
It's certainly in existing buildings.
Yes.
Yeah, in
But to the
existing
extent
buildings.
you have a tea house where you're actually adding, I guess it's not square footage, but it is table seating, right?
Right, yeah.
That would not come under that, and they would need to come under number 4
So
here.
then they're left to the devices of the parking ordinance right now.
Yeah.
Right. Barbara?
Some of this would be covered by,
My only
not-
comment is, and I'm kind of putting myself out there, but the night when I came to go to a city council meeting and I saw staff across the street park their cars from the Kensington, the only available parking was inside the Kensington in the visitor section, so I went and parked there. So this is gonna be like musical parking. If it's not available, you can just kind of go park anywhere. But I can see where it will save, like Dr. Sammy, he spent over, what, $10,000 to do that parking study? And then there's other places that have not had to do that. So in a way, I can see that you're saving some of the businesses from having to go through that. But I'm still a little bit, I kind of agree with you where it's a little bit gray area of what available parking is gonna be there and what's gonna be the overlay. Like I said, you know, if it's gonna be crowded and I see an empty parking lot across the street, I'll go park there. Because it's obvious to me now that the spaces up front are being taken by other businesses.
Yeah, and one of the issues there, I mean, this is something we've had a lot of discussions about the parking, is
Well, I actually
that there might
kind
need
of
to
got
be
a little
more
irritated,
time.
so I went and I counted up 13 cars that were parked from City Hall on down.
Mhm.
It was a busy night. Unusual, but busy. And then I drove into the Kensington and I counted 13 available parking spots. And I thought, well, I wonder why the staff is parking. You know,
No, it's
on a Tuesday night
complicated.
across
I
the
mean,
street.
They don't have maybe a parking arrangement or.
Yeah, well, they're short 10 spots, but maybe they were told, you know, leave it open for visitors or something. So I thought, okay, I'm visiting. I want to go to a city council meeting. Parking's available, so, you know, but it was just, it would have been nice to have parked in front of City Hall,
Right.
you know, especially because the back parking lot was full. So that's it. It's going to be like musical parking spaces, possibly. I mean, it's still that thin gray area. But
Right. Well, again, that's why we had some discussions about time limiting, having more time-limited spaces in front of the businesses so that employees and people who are coming to park for the whole day don't park right in front of the building that where patrons would really want to park.
But the other part of what we're talking about here is that if you there are going to be times when you're going to have to walk a couple of blocks if you don't get there early, so to speak. Okay, to have enough available parking where everybody would want it, we would have more asphalt than building here. And so you really have to think about the overall, what's your overall cityscape like?
yeah, except there's a lot of parking in the commercial zone available in that giant parking lot.
Yeah, behind.
There's plenty of parking back there, and
Just
it's
nobody-
only a
yeah.
half a block away from the front of the buildings.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like we beat parking up. Let's move on. Landscaping. So this landscaping section was almost identical to the old R3 landscaping section, so we made the same changes here that we did in the R3.
Already done.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and a lot of it goes back to the, the lid stuff for water saving. So I don't think we need to, beat that up anymore.
Your underlines and your strike-throughs are the same ones that were applied
Yeah,
for that other? Okay. These are further modifications on the other landscaping.
From
that you did.
R3.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
okay. Yeah, this is, the black, the blue, and the red is all consistent with the R3. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've got a black and white one, so I don't know the color, but, yeah, it's essentially the same.
consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, 1736-120 is screening, and this is the same language we used in R3, which is a more general concept of screening instead of telling people how big their blocks and their block walls have to be. 1736-130 is we've added a concept of hours of operation, and one of the main reasons for this is that if instead of guessing what types of uses typically run late and then regulating the uses, we could actually just regulate late opening, and then we could be more lenient about uses in general. But the hours, you know, are just sort of guesstimates on what we think is reasonable, and so we flag this so that people could look at it and make sure they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, we really didn't have a consensus it's not that we disagreed, it's like we sort of didn't know what other people would think about this idea and these particular numbers of business hour.
And also in some other cities, we saw that they'll have hours, but then like on Friday and Saturday night, they'll allow those hours to go later without some sort of other review. So that's another concept.
The hours is it's really business dependent to some degree. Like, I mean, I probably want my coffee shop to be able to be open at 5:30 in the morning, only because so I can grab it before I sit in traffic, you know. And does a half hour make a difference? Well, yeah, it kind of does, you know, in that instance. But
Even 5:30.
yeah, but most other businesses, you know, they're after 6 a.m. It's not going to matter a whole lot of beans, you know. I can get my flowers later. I can do whatever else. But, and same with on the other end, which may not be as big an issue, but, you know, restaurants and stuff, you may, seems reasonable, like 10's kind of the cutoff, but like on a Friday, Saturday night, maybe, and I know you put that in.
Right, yeah.
Maybe 11, you know. So I don't know how you parse that out for businesses, but.
Why do we regulate it at all?
Because
Nuisance.
it's nuisance factors.
Because you do have some
It's a nuisance. I mean, it's not like it's a giant commercial area. You do have residential uses nearby, and it's a mixed-use area. So, you know, you don't want.
Yeah, the mixed-use argument is.
You don't want people partying till 3 in the morning and making a lot of noise. Is the general concept.
And the other concern is early morning deliveries from delivery trucks. We've heard many complaints about that.
Okay. Well, that we haven't.
Stop that because that's not part of hours of operation.
Right, and then that's not covered here.
Yeah.
So.
And that's going to be that's going to be more of an issue. I mean, as we promote living downtown,
Yeah, you can.
like we're doing, and I'm in agreement with that because you know we don't need as much square footage for a lot of commercial as we did, you know, a few years ago, and we become more urban. Then issues like you know, delivery trucks making a lot of noise at 3:30 in the morning, you're going to start hearing more and more complaints about that.
Those complaints, I'm sure, from the residential side near the commercial, right?
Or from people who are living in the little units that are being provided, mixed in with the commercial.
I don't really have any problems with these hours. I just, it may become a problem for certain businesses who may want to open earlier. And I don't know if that's just the nature of when you set something like this, you're going to catch some people.
Well, the other part of it is it's a minor CUP to go a little earlier. It's not like impenetrable.
Is this a good time that maybe discussion for some additional disabled parking be available, like in front of the theater and in front of the pharmacy? I don't know when this comes into play with the planning.
Yeah,
I know that the ADA study isn't, the $50,000 study hasn't been, I think, written up yet, so maybe wait for that, but.
Right, we're gonna look at the parking code later on. I mean, not later on tonight, I mean, months down the road, in the future, thank you. And that's when we'll get at that.
But are we adding this?
Yes,
Like,
we're adding
we
this.
didn't have anything.
We didn't have anything like this.
And
We
so-
could just ditch the whole thing if
How
you
was it
think it's,
regulated prior to this? It wasn't.
Well, the
it just
way-
got tacked onto a CUP, like.
it got
in the
tacked
course of-
onto a CUP, and it was sort of, you would guess at what uses tend to be open later, so you would require more CUP. And so by separating this out, we
Yeah.
could sort of be more lenient to the use itself, if you're gonna be compliant with the timing.
You don't have to go through the. You can avoid the CUP.
Right. So the way this would be regulated before is, a coffee shop would require CUP, and then you'd set the hours in the CUP.
Okay. So I like that because it eliminates that hurdle, right?
Do you
But then we
feel-
just said you'd have to get a minor.
If you wanna go
wanted to
before 6.
go Later or
But we could,
earlier.
if you think 6 is too early, or too.
That was the only instance to me that, like, if
Yeah.
my Starbucks can't open at
That
6 and.
That
you
resonated
know,
when we talked to
in town
somebody
or-
who was talking about opening a coffee roasting place.
Like-
You know, if that's.
I mean, that's prime business hour, like that morning.
Yeah.
Whatever, 5 to 5:30 to.
I wouldn't know.
But
Well,
couldn't we make?
I wouldn't either on most days.
Couldn't we make the window go overnight that no business would open between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m.?
Yeah, well, we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
that later. If you wanna open between midnight and 4, you need a full CUP. So it's, there's a 4-hour window for a full CUP, and then there's 2-hour windows for minor on either side.
And a minor is director and a full is us.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you wanna
And
go
so we
early.
can, move those where you want.
I mean, to me, I feel like, yes, we could do that, but we could just as easily
Move it to 5.
move it to 5, and then we don't capture, like, no one has to jump through any hoops, and we're not solving the nuisance problem. That's a whole different issue.
Or we could just, if you think the morning's not that big of a deal, we could just say between midnight and 5 a.m. is a CUP, and then just regulate the later with the minor.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Okay.
And, okay, let's do that. And then, do you want to,
You think this is something we should ask? When we had someone applying for a liquor license, I think, we asked the police chief to come talk to us about what they thought. Do you remember that?
mhm.
We thought about that, about the hours of operation and how late. There was some question we had about
Well, that's
that.
the other thing is a lot of stuff is
more of an issue for nuisance to me, the night kind of morning.
another thing to keep in mind is we still are gonna say all alcohol uses require full CUP.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna be able to regulate that as well.
Mhm.
But, yeah, this does say shall open for business, not shall be open for business, right? So it's only what time they can open.
Mhm.
So they
Yeah,
can
well, that's
just, they could start at a regular hour and still be open late, and that's not covered.
No. Shall be open.
I can change
To
it to shall
customers.
be
It says
open.
shall open.
Yeah, but
I will say
There
shall
is a
be open.
shall be open.
Right.
Oh, I see.
That's why I thought there were two different time periods.
Oh,
I
see.
like your idea of it's the night into the morning is really the potential for these conflicts.
Right.
It's, once you get to that 5 a.m. kind of thing,
Or
I
like
think it's,
drunk people.
I don't know.
I mean,
Okay.
What's the issue? What's the actual issue with people being open overnight? What's the issue?
It's the noise.
Loitering, noise.
Loitering, noise.
Drunk people tend to be louder than non-drunk people, but
I mean, who's up
but
there?
even
Four people
even
are
sober
not, like,
people can be doing
rowdy.
regular things. No, even not being rowdy,
Yeah.
doing regular things in the middle of the night is a lot noisier than the
Yeah.
ambient noise.
And who's it gonna bother? That little house around the corner from the poppy cake, right? Imagine something on that corner was a restaurant open late or really early, and you're the person who lives next door to it.
Well, but I
That's
mean,
the
even
issue.
like on like
Just for
villages
example.
and like Victoria Lane's right behind
Behind,
it, right?
yeah.
But noise travels. I mean, you could easily.
They're throwing their old pizza junk into the dumpster at
it's one of those
midnight,
things
and it's
like
a loud crash when it goes down.
I don't
Those
live
kinda
there
sounds, right?
near there, so it's not an issue. But I could
my
see if you were right there and it became an issue and you couldn't like
Yeah, I mean, I'm just
many
trying to-
awards have been started.
I'm not
because-
saying, I'm not saying I don't believe it, I'm just trying to imagine what the
Yeah.
issues are. It's noise, mostly, right?
Mostly noise. And
It's mostly noise, yeah.
It is really common to have an hours of operation, like base hours of operation
Mm-hmm.
in your municipal code, and it actually is more freeing because that's your kind of by right use, and if you want to vary from it, then you need the.
Yes.
Mhm.
And what
As
are the,
opposed to every single time you are gonna set hours of operation through a conditional use permit, but then you could only do it.
And then a lot of times it just depends on, you know, who the staff member is, who the commissioners is, if the neighbors come and complain or don't.
what are the usual hours that you have seen in other municipalities? What are they-
Usually, usually or as early as 5 or 6, and it's the same concept, Monday through Friday. The general uses close by 10, so I've seen as late as 11 for some. And then on Saturday and Sunday, especially if there's restaurants, restaurants tend to stay up open later, so it'll be midnight. And then there'll be possibly other restrictions if there's a live band.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
But those are the kinds of general, so this
And-
is
and in
well
the morning,
within.
5 or 6?
Yeah, this is really pretty consistent with what I've seen, and there usually is allowance for an extra hour or two in the evening time for Friday night, Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do we want to go, we're just gonna kill the morning for the minor and just put 5 AM?
Yeah, that's a kind of
And then we'll do 10 to midnight, but, for a minor, but you can be open till 11 on Friday and Saturday. Is that what we want to do?
That sounds reasonable to me.
When you say 10 to midnight,
If you're open, if you want to stay open later than
10.
10,
I see.
but close by midnight, you need a minor. If
Gotcha,
you want to
yeah.
stay open later than midnight, you
Yeah.
need it full.
But that only applies Monday through Thursday, right?
Right.
Monday through Thursday.
Right,
And the
11
So-
PM.
So Sunday through Thursday, the hours you could be open,
5 AM to 10.
5 to 10,
Yeah,
by right, 5 to 10
5 to 10, with a minor conditional use permit
to midnight.
till midnight.
midnight.
Good extent.
And then Saturday, Sunday till 11, and then till, if you want to be later. Okay,
You need a minor for the extra hour.
for the extra hour, or, well, how
And
late?
if you're gonna stay open past midnight, you
You
have to
need a
have
full conditional use.
Right.
That seems reasonable to me.
I think
Does
that's
that seem like
Okay.
a usual kind of thing?
It's reasonable, and it's consistent with a lot of code. It's similar to South Pass code.
Uh-huh, okay. Thank you.
Well, they're sort of wild, crazy down South Pass. I don't know.
They like their restaurants.
Um, okay, outdoor storage. There wasn't much regulating outdoor sales, so we added that as a minor. One thing that we didn't do is put any sort of de minimis thing in here, and I don't know if we wanted to do that. Like if people just put a tiny thing out, but on the other hand, it's probably,
Well, if you have like a newspapers out front,
right.
you know, it's like, are they really gonna have to?
So,
No.
Savor the Flavor puts a little cart
Yeah.
out
Right.
front. Is that,
Well, that's the thing. Technically, under this, it would,
It's an
would,
enclosed
right?
structure.
so this
But-
would be one of those,
But yeah, well, so there's two different ways you can do that. One is you could do stick your head in the sand methodology, or you could say something like that's more. You could try to finesse it with the word significant, or you could start putting square footages in.
okay.
So
Because, you know, it's like, we don't care if someone has a few
No.
newspapers out front, they do that at the bottle shop, right?
Sometimes you have the sign too, like
Right.
today's special.
but if it's something like, you know, a lumber store, right,
Yeah.
or that has all sorts of, then you clearly want to regulate that, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, how do you want to deal with it, the minor stuff?
I mean, it seems like there should be an exemption for, you know, a few things out in front of this little.
So.
I mean, you can't
Are-
obstruct
are
the
we
road.
solving
Does it
for-
have a little
Are we
cart out
solving for
front?
two things? Because are we also solving for somebody who decides to get a business permit at City Hall and then just go park over next to the Starbucks and ad hoc selling stuff?
Out of a cart or something, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious if we're solving for that example, then you could put a radius from the front door, so that the lumberyard couldn't put 2x4x8s out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Would that be covered anywhere?
Temporary use permits speak to sidewalk sales.
Oh,
Yeah, if it's
Okay.
temporary,
Okay.
that's a different
Okay,
thing.
I just wanted to make sure it was covered. So.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, like, if it's a couple feet out and it's a little cart, like, I mean, really? Those are the kind of things that just drive me nuts, because it's like, not drive me nuts.
We
like,
could add a de minimis
to
exception.
have get another permit for that. Like, it's
it's a
just.
de minimis
I
exception.
mean, it's too small to worry about.
Uh-huh,
It's too small to complain about then, probably.
yeah.
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know about
so-
that. I'm
Well,
sure
a lot of
pe-
these
people.
There's sort of an inherent de minimis exception, right?
Right,
yeah.
Through
We'll
code
follow that.
enforcement, and so
I mean, this is going to be a complaint thing. If
Right,
if a
it's-
piece of lumber sticking out, outside of Arnold's and it's blocking the sidewalk. Okay, that's like one thing, but if it's like
and so my thought was, I don't really think we need to bake it in because
Yeah.
no one's going to complain, but we could. Yeah, and I sort of don't want to get into,
Yeah.
this arc and
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Okay. Moving on then, loading facilities, we didn't change. Lighting, we added some dark sky stuff from the general plan. Property maintenance, this is just sort of cross-referencing that there are full titles that deal with property maintenance issues so that, people don't fail to maintain their businesses. Let's see. And then, yeah, that's it. So let's see, we want to cut out at 11, is that when we end?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to go to the other code sections, because those I think are pretty simple, and then save the use discussion for next time?
I think
The
it's
Or do you
good
want to
to-
try
I
to?
think it'd be good to do the use one. Personally,
The
I
list.
would like to do the list when I'm more awake.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because if we dive into use, we're going to get partway through and then
Yeah.
leave.
well,
rather-
just a question on the list though. Is the goal of that? Is you've broken it into major categories.
Mhm.
Is the goal also to then drill down the very specific items that the backlist that the director would have? Like, are we trying
Yeah.
to figure that out?
Well, we can do
you
that
got
to
it.
the extent we want. I mean, what we did is we took all the little things and we made the first cut of the director's list for him, right? Just taking that stuff out of code. And then we've got the categories. So to the extent we want to, we can advise the director to add or change or whatever, or we can just go, look, we've got enough, the director can figure this out.
We don't really want to go where it was, which was having this extremely specific list of every possible thing you can think of that
I agree.
changes over time. And it's sort of for the convenience, the director can maintain a list for their convenience so that when they're, we don't want to, have a complete list. of
No, I
every
agree.
single thing. It doesn't work. We don't think it works very well.
So my thought on the list is, I guess, make sure we're good with the general categories and the sort of thresholds, and then maybe take a quick look over the list. And if there's one thing that people go, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense," but I don't think we want to spend a whole bunch of time on it. I think the whole point is
We don't want.
we don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on it. That's the concept.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. All right. So where to?
You want to take a look at manufacturing zone then?
Yeah, what?
Where was that? Is there a red line version?
Yeah, that's Exhibit F.
Oh,
Yeah,
duh.
okay.
Okay, so as y'all remember, East Montecito in the general plan is the artisan and mixed-use neighborhood, and in zoning code, it's the manufacturing zone, and so it's been somewhat inconsistent for a good 20 years now. So we didn't want to necessarily fix everything. We just wanted to fix the how it interacts with the a commercial zone, because all commercial zone uses are allowed in the manufacturing zone. So if you look at 1740.010, the permitted uses, the first one is any use permitted in the C zone. But then it had this weird ambiguous language that always trapped us up in every single thing. So we just scratched that. And then later on in 1740.020, we just have a cross-reference that says, if you're doing C zone uses, you do C zone standards.
Got it.
And that makes it a lot cleaner and easier. And then, because of some of the feedback we heard from coffee roasters and people who wanted to do jams and things, we took this bakery thing and made it sort of more inclusive. Food processing,
Production, food
basically.
production, really.
And then there was a feel yard, which we couldn't stand not fixing.
Yard. Okay.
So food processing,
It's totally legal.
does that mean that they could, I mean,
Oh, boy.
small scale slaughterhouse could come in there?
No, we're
Well,
deleting slaughterhouse.
Just
we actually
rabbits.
had rabbit slaughter, which we cut out.
Rabbit
But I'm
and
just-
poultry
I'm-
slaughter.
My only question is about whether or not food processing.
We can add that if you want,
to-
non-included slaughtering. Slaughtering and
I'm
rendering.
just saying that is,
I think it
that's
is.
technically food processing,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So
Part of it.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it being there. I like
Well-
fresh sausage, but I understand that may not
We
be what
just,
people want in
we,
that
we,
zone.
we cut out poultry and rabbit slaughtering from the model.
Okay.
'cause we
Yeah,
thought maybe it was no
Bob couldn't
longer
stomach that, so.
consistent with Sierra Madre's.
And then this
Public
rubber thing and
standards.
tires. So
Safety.
that's it. And then, again, if you go to 1740.20, that's where we have the cross-reference that says, if you do a use from C zone, you do the C zone standards.
And so if somebody, in my example, came in and wanted to build or process sausage there and that maybe.
Yeah, but
do some
not kill
fresh-
the pig.
They would have to, right, just process.
Yeah.
They would have to come get a permit or a conditional use to do that?
Yeah.
That's-
Okay.
If it's not on this list,
It's on the
and
s-
it's not in C, you need a
Right,
CUP.
okay.
But it's on, I mean, food processing and production facility would be permitted.
Right, now, but if we could exempt not including slaughtering and rendering.
Yeah, I mean, with this list, you could go.
Right.
What, can I ask one nitpicky question?
Yes.
On ceramic products, why is it so specific? Is there a reason for that?
Why is this list the way it is?
No,
Well, okay, so you just, this was.
Oh, yeah,
We
we
just made that
just-
we
particular,
made those
yeah,
tiny red lines.
Yeah, we just,
And, yeah,
Why'd you
look,
change
this,
that thing
this
about-
Well, good
zoning
thing for all
code,
the people who are doing ceramic figurines, because
yeah,
captured it.
we didn't touch that.
this code needs
And it has to
lots
be
of work.
previously pulverized clay. It can't be non-previously pulverized clay.
Okay, how much percent do you have left on your battery?
Not I'm reading it on my phone.
Okay, okay, so that's the only other changes in this. Are we good on that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then going to Exhibit G, the revised discretionary permits, which is Chapter 1760.
Where are you? Oh, yeah.
One thing to note is that Section 1760.030 is is uses that are allowed everywhere in town with a CUP, and we didn't change this list at all, but as a subcommittee, but we might want to address that once we get to uses, to see if there's any things that we don't want in town, even if they get a CUP.
Airports?
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
airports.
Okay, so the changes start on 1760.041, and D, there's 8. There's the cross references on this, and we cleaned those up and added the new one. And then 1760.055, minor conditional use permits C. Previously, we've made some revisions to the CUP findings, and so what we did here is make corresponding revisions to the minor CUP findings, and then we also took out in item C1 residential character, because now we're applying the minor CUP anywhere in the town.
Oh, I see.
So you just have to be, otherwise, you can't be otherwise inconsistent with the character of the neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's the only revisions on these. So these were pretty straightforward. So we don't want to get to uses now, right? Do you want to explain the structure now?
We just
What?
wind up re-explaining it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
let's just-
let's just say
I
this
mean, that's
is
the only
enough.
thing left, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just think we should come back to it, and, because it's,
Okay.
This is
Good.
good, though.
Well, that's enough discussion for tonight. Let's move on to oral communication from the audience. No, we've got to pass. Now we'll move on to planning commission reports. Anybody have anything?
Form 700. In the
Oh.
past, the city clerk has sent us we haven't had a city clerk, though we do now,
Right?
but we haven't got anything about it, and it
Online
needs to
now.
be filed. Well, I can't file it online, it doesn't work, but I can.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it won't let me do it, but you can download it online, but everyone needs to do
PDF.
it, right?
Right.
I don't know what date
End
it's
of
due.
March,
April fir-
or April.
first.
April
April
1st.
1st, and we,
Or April 1st.
yeah.
So
But
by
I-
the end of March?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got
By the end of March.
an email from, what is it, FP?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get one because I can't file it online for some
Ah.
reason. It won't let me do it, even though I called them.
Come in and see.
Have you done one?
Give you a copy.
You did a one to get on, right?
You
No, it
can,
took
you
the
can
class
get
to
a,
get on.
a hard
but you have to do
copy
a
and do it
form
manually if
Yeah,
you
that's
want.
It's
what I
usually
thought,
after the
yeah.
first,
I've seen this.
no, I think you're doing your first one now.
This will be my first one.
I think
Yeah,
so.
I just downloaded
Yeah,
a
you
hard
gotta do
copy,
one.
but
Mhm.
This-
everyone
Oh,
needs
the
to.
joy.
I'm just reminding everyone we need to do it, and probably Bill, anyone who's not here should get
I
reminded.
remember
just
they
in case
told
they
us
don't know.
when we came on, well, we'll let you know about that.
The evil Form 700.
Yeah, it's really important to do it by the end of March.
I'm glad they
because
brought it
there-
up.
There's penalties, there's $100 a day penalty.
And the other thing is, it's confusing, so try to do it early, because that way you have time to ask questions. Because
Yeah.
I found that I needed to
Do I
do a
need,
lot of
do I
follow-up.
need the accountant?
No, not that much probably, but you don't put the actual dollar amounts, you put categories. So it's like 0 to 500, 500,
You had to fill
whatever.
out one when you joined, didn't you?
No, you do
No.
it the first day.
No, they just told us that, well, we'll let you know when you need to do it.
Oh,
And
But
this
you
is the
didn't.
first that we're hearing about.
right,
it
that's
tonight.
why I thought,
Technically, you're supposed to file a taking off,
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Starting.
You are supposed to, but
yeah,
didn't.
I
you
did.
didn't, nobody helped you, so.
Yeah. 'Cause
It's,
when I
it's
started, I
okay,
had to.
you can do it before the end of March, you'll be fine. You just check the box, assuming office, it's your first statement.
It's not that bad. Just save whatever you fill out, because
It is that bad.
And then
You
it looks the same year
filling the
after
same thing
year.
out.
Yeah.
Well, that,
save it.
yeah, that's on the great assumption that all your financial stuff stays the same.
it's
If it
pretty right.
changes, then you
The
gotta.
ranges are so big, it's.
The ranges are nice.
Unless
But
you
you
Instead of
really
bring
have
back-
to read this stuff, because it's really confusing, I have to say. It's
There are
confusing.
instructions.
There are instructions, but you really.
They'll send you corrections too, so.
Oh,
I've
have you?
had that.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
Please clarify this, so.
Anyway, that's my only thing.
Okay, one,
We'll help you with it if you need
Yes,
help.
exactly.
City clerk will help you, city attorney's office can help you. You're not gonna be abandoned.
Or jailed.
Right.
Well, it is, it is
the-
public information, so.
One other report, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the non-conforming changes that we proposed, the city council approved without any changes. So that's good news.
Great.
Although they did have a number of questions,
They did? Oh, good.
which Gina and I fielded, hopefully
Yeah.
somewhat to their understanding. Staff?
So we have cases that we're gonna be bringing to you, both meetings in April.
Okay.
So getting back to, this discussion will probably be in May.
Okay. Are the different items lengthy?
We possibly could bring it back sooner. I mean, the April 5th, I think we have one case.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
two.
Possibly two, that's true, and then, depending upon if we, for the second meeting, move one of the cases up.
Okay.
So, and that's what we're trying to do. So
Oh.
definitely not April 5th, possibly the 19th, we might be able to continue this discussion.
Any prediction about whether those cases are going to be, are they going to be protracted, or are they relatively easy ones?
One of them will be relatively easy, another one might be a little bit more involved.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, if we can stuff this in, I mean, we've got all the stuff, so whenever. And I think we've probably got, what, 2 hours of discussion, you think? Probably.
Yeah, it's,
And also, most likely in June, we would be canceling at least that first meeting. I won't be here.
Okay.
And it depends whether or not we have another person on staff at a senior planner level on board, but we'll see how that comes out.
Okay. And then, as far as the parking ordinance or the other ordinances, we can discuss that when we get a little farther along on this one, I think.
It'd be great to see the list of projects that lay before us. I don't think I have any idea of the size or shape or scope of those, so.
Okay. Yeah, we had a meeting a few months ago where we talked about that, right? So it exists.
Great.
Okay. With that, we will adjourn the meeting till, was it April 4th, you said? Our next meeting?
yeah.
April 5th.
April 5th.